The story begins by talking about a well-known figure, the notorious, incorrigible, violent, and reclusive, the disabled and disgraced successor to Count Perdium. This man was Grizzlane Perdium, and no one could understand how the most powerful knight in the north was losing to him. At that moment, Grizzlane approached wearing his heavy armor, carrying his huge axe, and coolly observed the knight before him, asking provocatively about the trap he had prepared, since he himself had spent a lot of money on it. The knight, surprised, wanted to know if Grizzlane had known about the plan all along, but Grizzlane coolly explained that he knew not only the plan, but also the size of the enemy army, all the spies under cover, and even where the supplies were coming from. The knight, confused and desperate, said that this was impossible since he had never told anyone about his plan, and he didn't understand how someone like Grizzlane could know everything. At that moment, Grizzlane kicked him hard in the face, telling him to stop shouting and acting like a coward. He told him that he could scream all he wanted, but that he, Grizzlane Perdium, would win this war because he had a much bigger plan. The story then flashes back to a year before that scene. Near the territory known as the Perdium Estate, in the kingdom of Luthania, Grizzlane woke up confused and thinking that it didn't make sense. He was alive, but that seemed impossible since his last memory was of his last fight. He had been disarmed, was badly wounded, completely covered in blood, and had been hit right in the chest. On that occasion, his enemy had approached him and said that the battle would finally come to an end, calling him the king of the mercenaries and acknowledging that Grizzlane Perdium was one of the 7 most powerful men on the continent. The man who defeated him was called Idun, and he was also one of the 7 strongest warriors on the continent. For him, Grizzlane's defeat marked the end of the war. He asked if his rival had any last words, and Grizzlane replied that his only regret was that he hadn't been able to complete his revenge. With hatred in his eyes, he asked Idun to kill him soon. But Idun, with disdain, said that it was hard to believe that someone like him, successor to the decadent Perdium family, had been defeated. He also commented that he had abandoned his own home after his sister's death. Confused, Grizzlane wondered how someone from a different kingdom knew something so personal. Idun replied that everyone was looking for him because he had allied himself with Duke Delphine to destroy his own family. Grizzlane, trembling with rage, then realized that there really was someone behind the fall of his house. But Idun said he wouldn't waste time explaining this to someone about to die, and when Grizzlane went off in a rage, Idun said it made no difference and cut his head off without hesitation. However, instead of dying, Grizzlane found himself in front of a mirror, looking at his own reflection. His head was intact, and he noticed that he looked younger. He wondered if he had been captured by a group of magicians who were experimenting on his body. Just then, someone knocked on the door and called him young master. It was Ricardo, a loyal soldier of House Perdium. He asked why Grizzlane hadn't left the room yet, and suddenly Grizzlane drew his sword, put it to his throat, and told him that he would only come out alive if he answered his questions. Ricardo, surprised, tried to understand what was going on and said that he was exaggerating, asking if he really didn't remember anything. He explained that Grizzlane had had a tantrum and fallen asleep, and that he himself had insisted on leading the offensive against the orcs. Grizzlane, still confused, wondered what these orcs were and found it completely absurd. Even so, Richard said he would wait for him outside and told him to get his things. Grizzlane, surprised, asked where they were going, and Ricardo replied that they were returning to Perdium territory. Upon hearing this, Grizzlane was paralyzed. He mentally repeated those words, Perdium territory, the same family that, as far as he could remember, had been destroyed. Later, Grizzlane found himself back in Perdium territory, and as he looked around, he recognized that this place really was his home. It was Perdium territory. But something didn't make sense, because he clearly remembered seeing everything destroyed with his own eyes, right in front of him. Ricardo appeared and asked if Grizzlane had had a nightmare or had amnesia, and said that it was all right, they might be a bit poor, but to say that the territory was ruined was an exaggeration. Grizzlane, confused, wondered if he was dreaming. Then he pulled hard on his own cheek and realized it wasn't a dream. He noticed that he was younger and, seeing his family's land still standing, concluded that he had gone back in time. He began to remember when he was a child and lived in resentment because his family was poor. His behavior was immature, filled with a strong sense of inferiority, which always led to unpleasant situations. Over time, everyone in the family began to avoid him, which led him to run away from home. Years later, he would become a mercenary. He survived countless battles, built up skills and a feared reputation, and eventually returned to Perdium territory only to apologize for past mistakes. But when he arrived, it was too late. Everything was in ruins and he had lost everything. Only at that moment, before his eyes, the territory was intact. The houses, the towers, the walls, and even the precious people of his land were there, alive and kicking. Grizzlane thought the whole thing was ridiculous. Going back in time seemed absurd, but he was so happy that he wanted to go out singing. However, he knew it was too early to celebrate. Ricardo himself had said that the orcs were getting closer. Grizzlane then remembered that day. It was impossible to forget. All the soldiers who had set out on an expedition to stop the orcs had died. That was why he himself had insisted on leading the attack against them. At the time, they believed that only 3 orcs had been seen, so they were overconfident. But the reality was brutal. An entire army of orcs suddenly appeared and completely crushed any attempt at defense. Perdium territory was razed to the ground that day. Grizzlane knew that the orcs had no sophisticated strategy. They were just brute force and savagery. The problem was that no one would believe him, and the mistakes would be repeated. Suddenly, as a confirmation of his fears, an entire tower was thrown on top of him, as if by some monstrous creature. The soldiers began to shout in desperation, warning that the orcs were already there. Although they still didn't look like a full army, their arrival was impressively fast, and Grizzlane couldn't understand how they had moved so quickly. The orcs began to massacre all the soldiers in front of them, advancing without mercy. In the midst of the chaos, a voice rang out, ordering the battle to form up. It was Skovan, the expedition's commander, who immediately set off for the battlefield, but he was soon intercepted by a huge orc. When Skovan saw the creature, he was paralyzed and thought that this was completely unexpected. The orcs had arrived before any preparations had been made, and there were far more of them than anyone could have imagined. Just then, someone shouts for the commander and warns him that there is an orc right behind him. Before the enemy could attack, someone ran past and pushed Skovan out of harm's way. It was obviously Grizzlane, who without hesitation set off to attack the orc. He advanced with precision and cut off the creature's arm, slicing all its fingers up to the shoulder. Everyone around was completely shocked, including the orc himself, who lost his arm and fell to the ground with a loud thud that echoed throughout the battlefield. Grizzlane thought that he still couldn't use mana and wondered why exactly he had been sent back to the past. Even so, he reached out to help Skovan to his feet, but actually wanted the commander to hand over command of the battle to him. Skovan, still confused, thought it was absurd and thought that soldiers were dying while they were wasting time with useless conversations. He stood up and said that he couldn't just hand over command like that. This wasn't a game, and he couldn't just leave his post, not even for someone like Grizzlane. Grizzlane realized that it wouldn't be easy. At the time, he was still seen as a spoiled young man, and it made sense that the commander didn't trust him. He thought that Skovan, unaware that he had gone back in time, was just doing the right thing. However, before he could say anything else, another orc came running towards them. Skovan ordered Grizzlane to back off, saying that he didn't have enough experience to deal with it. Grizzlane then said that the commander had left him no choice. He threw his sword with force. The blade passed very close to Skovan, who immediately asked what he was doing. When he looked back, he saw that the sword had stuck exactly in the orc's head, killing it on the spot. The creature's body fell hard to the ground, and the commander was speechless, trying to understand how Grizzlane had done it. Grizzlane then asked if the commander knew what was most important in a battle. He said that nobody wins a war by feeling afraid. It was necessary to inspire the soldier, to awaken their fighting spirit. He then ran to get his sword back and advanced onto the battlefield as if he felt no fear at all. He passed through the front line and began to eliminate the orcs one by one with quick, precise cuts. Skovan couldn't react. He watched in disbelief as Grizzlane cut down his enemies with such ease. He thought that even using mana, he couldn't move at that speed. He tried to understand how Grizzlane could fight like that. Even though he was exhausted, Grizzlane made no unnecessary movements. Each attack was precise and hit directly at the enemy's vital points. He seemed stronger than any knight, even if he wasn't using mana. Grizzlane wondered if that was all the orcs had. He said that he was just getting warmed up and teased the enemy tribe, challenging them to try again. Meanwhile, Ricardo was desperate to see the orcs all turning on Grizzlane, but another soldier told him that he wasn't running away. Ricardo shouted, calling for the commander, who was still standing there with no reaction, still trying to understand what was happening. He thought that Grizzlane wasn't running away from the orcs, but running straight towards all of them at the same time, and in that instant, he realized the plan. Grizzlane was leading the orcs to the cliff. The commander, understanding the strategy, shouted for everyone to raise their shields in advance. It was time to follow Master Grizzlane. Meanwhile, Grizzlane kept running ahead of the orcs, leading them straight towards the cliff. He thought that Skovan was a competent commander and that he should have understood the plan by now. Even though he wanted to kill all the orcs with his bare hands, he recognized that his body was still weak, but with the right strategy, it would work. Soon, soldiers began to approach from behind the orcs. They were the troops led by Skovan with their shields in hand. Grizzlane, seeing this, thought that they had arrived at just the right moment. Without hesitation, he jumped off the cliff and shouted for the commander to give the signal. Skovan understood immediately and ordered all the soldiers to push the orcs over the edge. The squires advanced in sync, hitting their enemies hard in the belly, and the orcs began to plummet like heavy stones being crushed in the fall. The impact act was brutal, and the soldiers cried out with relief as they realized that they had actually managed to beat off the onslaught. But when Scoven looked around for Grizzlane, he realized that he was hanging on the edge of the cliff, holding on only with his blade embedded in the rock. Even in that situation, Grizzlane was still smiling lightly. Scoven, relieved, smiled too, albeit nervously, and reached out to pull him up. However, Grizzlane said he couldn't move. His body was no longer responding. Then he let go of the blade and fell off the cliff. Everyone shouted his name in despair at his fall. In the darkness of the fall, Grizzlane began to hear a sweet, gentle voice. He wondered who Helena was, until he remembered his little sister, who had once loved him, but then rejected him. He wondered why he was reliving those memories. He saw Helena calling out to him, begging him to come with her, tugging at his hand in desperation. But at that moment, he woke up. Grizzlane opened his eyes with a warm towel over his forehead, lying in a comfortable bed in a well-kept room. He thought he was alive. It seemed that they had managed to rescue him. He wondered what that dream with Helena had been about, but he didn't have time to think about it. When he tried to get up, he felt intense muscle pain all over his body. He realized that his body wasn't ready yet, but at least that pain was a sign that he was still alive. Shortly afterwards, the door opened and a maid came in to say that he was finally awake. Grizzlane looked at her and asked if it was Belinda. She confirmed it, asking if he had any idea how worried she had been. She said that she had already warned him that he wasn't a soldier, but Grizzlane, without saying another word, pulled her into a tight hug. Belinda, surprised, asked if anything was wrong, but he said no, that he was just happy to see her. Grizzlane thought that Belinda had always been by his side, ever since he was just a child. She had accompanied him throughout his childhood, as a guardian, as a protector, and he had always been very grateful for that. When he left Perdium territory and returned years later, everything had already been destroyed, so he thought he would never have the chance to see her again in his life. Belinda, unable to understand his emotion, said that she saw him every day, so she didn't understand his reaction. But Grizzlane knew he needed to talk to her. He felt it was time to tell her the truth about what was going on. So he looked at her seriously and told her that she needed to listen carefully, because House Perdium was in danger. Belinda, frightened, asked how he knew that, and Grizzlane, with a firm look on his face, said that he died and came back to life. But Belinda, on hearing what Grizzlane was saying, only replied that he must have hit his head. Grizzlane tried to insist that he was serious, but Belinda only replied that the only person in danger there was himself. Grizzlane thought that, of course, she wouldn't believe him. Instead, she started scolding him, saying that he was probably pretending to be hurt just so he wouldn't have to go to the festival. Grizzlane, confused, asked what festival it was. Belinda explained that he couldn't have forgotten, since Lady Helena really wanted to go with him, and said that this was a good time for the two of them to get closer. It was then that Grizzlane remembered. It was true, there was always a festival in Perdium territory at that time of year. He thought that in his past life, he didn't go to the festival because he was too upset by his defeat in the expedition against the orcs. So he ignored his sister's wishes. He asked when the festival would be, and Belinda replied that it was still a week away. Hearing this, Grizzlane remembered that it was exactly on that day, a week later, that his life changed completely. He closed his eyes for a moment because there was a memory that had been torturing him for years. The image of his sister begging him to go to the festival with her. And then, that night, Helena died. Just then, the bedroom door opened, and Grizzlane felt his heart race. The memory that had always haunted him materialized before him, for it was Helena who entered the room. Without thinking, he ran and hugged her tightly. Even Belinda was surprised by this sudden gesture. Helena, suspicious, wondered if he was trying to play a trick or what he was really doing. But Grizzlane, his eyes watering, told her how much he missed her. Helena, a little awkwardly, said he was being strange and pushed him away. Grizzlane wondered if she had always been this strong, because he didn't remember her like that. Helena said that she was only there because Belinda had persuaded her to come. She also said that he shouldn't think he would be forgiven so easily. Grizzlane, confused, asked what she was talking about. Helena recalled that he had been extremely rude to her and asked if he had forgotten. Grizzlane reflected for a moment and realized that, back then, he hadn't been close to Helena. In his past life, he had been a terrible brother to her. Feeling the weight of that, he apologized sincerely. Belinda, shocked, asked if she had heard correctly. Helena, surprised, wanted to know how many times he had hit his head during the fight against the orcs. Grizzlane said that he had destroyed them all, but it seemed that no one took him seriously. It was as if everyone was sure that he had actually hit his head. Soon afterwards, Grizzlane felt a sharp pain in his muscles. Helena said that he had been brought back on a stretcher, and he knew it. Then Grizzlane looked at the two figures he loved most in his life. He gave a slight smile, recognizing that they were both exactly as he remembered them, and wondered why, in his past life, he had despised them so much. He remembered that he had turned down his sister's invitation to the festival, and that was the last time he had seen her. Her body was later found broken into several pieces by the knights of the territory. Grizzlane was lost in thought until someone knocked on the door and asked permission to enter. It was the knights, Jamal and Philip, who seemed to be Helena's bodyguards. She looked at them with a firm expression, attention and asked why they had come in, since she had asked them to wait outside. Jamal apologized, saying that he needed to deal with a matter related to the festival as some subordinates had questions and were waiting for instructions. Grizzlane, surprised, asked if Helena was in charge of the organization. Belinda replied that he would never know, since he never spent enough time at home to understand what was going on. She added that the fact that a noblewoman had to take on this kind of responsibility showed how weak the strength of House Perdium was. As Helena said goodbye and told everyone to take care of themselves, Grizzlane began to realize that he hadn't known how bad things were inside Perdium. In his past life, he had never cared about such matters, so he had no idea of the real situation. With a closer look, he said that he would also help with the preparations. Helena was quite surprised by the offer, and Belinda, shocked, asked if he was really offering to help the guild. Helena, laughing in disbelief, said that he had certainly hit his head. Later, in a busy area of the village where a fair was being prepared for the festival, people began to pay attention to an argument taking place in the middle of the courtyard. Helena and Grizzlane were arguing because she didn't want him to help with the preparations. Grizzlane, confused, asked why she didn't want him to. Helena said that he could help, as long as he stayed far away. Grizzlane then began to put the pieces together. In her past life, Helena's body had been found in a slum, a long way from the festival site. This meant that she had either been taken there against her will, or lured there with some kind of trap. If he wanted to prevent a repeat, he would need to investigate the slum area as well as the castle. While he was thinking, someone came running up to him. It was Fergus, a young soldier. Grizzlane, surprised, asked what he was doing there. Fergus, relieved, said that it was great to see him well, because as soon as he heard the news about the orcish attack, he rushed over. He said that as a loyal soldier of the young master, he couldn't stand idly by. Grizzlane thought he was exaggerating, and Helena, seizing the moment, said that Fergus had arrived at the right time and could take Grizzlane far away from there. Fergus readily agreed, and Grizzlane thought how annoying that delinquent reputation was. He knew that if he really wanted to investigate, he would have to do it the hard way. So he asked if there was a training center in the castle, and asked Fergus to take him there. Fergus, confused, wanted to know why, and Grizzlane replied that it was because he wanted to train. Fergus, amazed, agreed to take him. When they arrived, Grizzlane observed everything carefully and said that the place was in excellent condition, especially compared to the rest of the territory. He thought it would be a perfect place to train. In his past life as a mercenary, he had never had access to such a well-kept training space. Fergus explained that he had taken over the place just in case Grizzlane wanted to use it one day. Even if the young master had strayed from his path, Fergus believed that it wouldn't last forever. Grizzlane, listening to this, wondered if he had done all this in his past life. He felt a little bad that he had never noticed. Passing by Fergus, he told the soldier to live a good life, because the only thing that can't be solved is death. Fergus, surprised, said that it sounded like something someone much older would say. Grizzlane replied with a smile that he really was very sharp, and said that yes, he had come back to life. Fergus, a little frightened, asked him to stop. Grizzlane then said that he could go, because now he would start his training. In his past life at that age, Grizzlane thought that everyone was his enemy, but now he realized that it wasn't quite like that. He thought he still had a week before the incident happened. He knew that, at the time, a nobleman's son had been accused of Helena's death, and this had forced House Perdium to declare a territorial war. This war turned out to be the breaking point that led to the downfall of his family. In other words, the real trigger for the Perdium's downfall was Helena's death. So in that case, he needed to sort it out first. Grizzlane thought that, for the time being, the best thing to do was to train his own body. The problem was that he didn't have much time, but he still needed to gather at least a little mana. Mana was the supernatural resource that allowed humans to overcome their physical limits. Most people found it difficult to sense and gather mana, but even in the midst of the chaos of war, Grizzlane was already able to train his own mana. The key was to connect every point of mana in the air, condensing everything around the wind. Grizzlane thought that, after having survived so many battles, creating a mana core was nothing to him. So he tried his hardest, and thought that if he hadn't gone through all that, he would never have become one of the 7 most powerful people on the continent. That's because in his past life, he had found an ancient tome of magic that inspired him to create his own technique for gathering mana. This technique consisted of creating multiple mana cores. At that moment, he was forming 3 cores at the same time, and he thought that by adding all this to the natural core that already exists in the human body, the power would become immense and almost uncontrollable. But when he finished, Grizzlane spat out blood and realized that this was his limit. 3 cores was the most he could create now. In his past life, he had reached 5. He thought that this technique allowed him to unleash explosive power, but it also consumed mana quickly. And that was the problem that led to his defeat against Aiden. In that battle, he had attacked alongside an order of knights when he was already completely exhausted. If he had fought one-on-one, with his mana in perfect condition, he would surely have beaten Idun. He knew that the technique had always been unstable, but at that moment, it was the only option, especially now that he had youth on his side. Grizzlane thought that next time, he would decapitate Idun and be sure to kill Duke Delphine, as well as crushing everyone who was behind it. A week later, on the day of the festival, Grizzlane was getting ready. He put on a reinforced belt and attached his sword, while he carefully equipped himself. Helena was a little shocked to see this and mentally commented that he had actually gone. She was also surprised to have been invited by him to the festival, something she had never expected. Grizzlane replied that even a Perdium had the right to enjoy something in life, but Helena thought he'd been rather strange lately. She had heard that he had been training for the last few days. Grizzlane wondered what was so strange about a descendant of a knightly house training, and Helena thought it was because he had never cared. He had even told his father to die soon and pass the title on to him. But now, Helena could see that he was much better. She felt that he seemed to be back to his old self. Grizzlane, for his part, thought that during that last week, he had realized something important. His actions were really changing the way people treated him, even if it was little by little. This change was real. But he also knew that he had to be careful with this second chance in time. He thought that his every action now changed the future, and that he needed to carefully predict how time would alter with his every move, so that he could shape the situation the way he wanted. And now he finally felt prepared. Meanwhile, Helena was enjoying the festival with Grizzlane, but he couldn't relax completely. He was always watching the corners, on the lookout for anything, until Helena stopped and said it had been fun, even though she was a bit tired. Even so, she felt that the festival was the same every year. Grizzlane thought that nothing had happened up to that point, but the festival was already over. He wondered if something had changed because he had stayed with Helena the whole time. Just then, someone approached and asked if Helena wanted to go somewhere else. One of the riders commented that another festival was taking place in a nearby neighborhood and asked her what she thought. Helena decided to accompany him and joked that she would blame him if it wasn't fun. It was then that Grizzlane realized. The traitors were standing in front of him. They were Jamal and Philip, and he thought that these two were Helena's personal guards, responsible for protecting her since she was just a child. For this reason, they were seen as extremely trustworthy people in that territory. In the past, they had said that they tried to protect Helena, but now Grizzlane could see clearly. They were the damned traitors. It was at this point that they showed her the place where everything was supposed to take place, but it was an extremely isolated place, where there was absolutely no one around, and everything was very dirty and abandoned. Helena looked around and commented that there was nothing there, making it clear that she found the whole thing strange. Jamal tried to disguise it and said that it was because the place wasn't ready yet, but that things were going to start soon. Helena replied by saying that this was ridiculous, and at that moment Grizzlane understood everything. That abandoned place was the perfect setting for an ambush, because no one would ever look for them there, and besides, there was no way out. Helena became suspicious and pulled Grizzlane away, saying that they both needed to get out of there. However, Jamal insisted that she had to believe him, because a performance was going to take place in that place. Grizzlane began to wonder why Helena was so physically strong, and thought that she probably worked out. But just then, Philip blocked her way, and with a strange smile asked why she didn't stay just a little longer. Helena began to get visibly nervous as the two knights began to surround her strangely. She realized something was wrong and asked what was happening to them. Jamal replied that they didn't want to scare her, but that they had accepted a very advantageous deal. Helena, startled, asked what kind of deal that was. It was then that three people approached, and the man in front of them, who seemed to be the leader, introduced himself as Frank. He commented that the two of them had really kept to the agreement, and Jamal replied that, of course, they had brought Helena as agreed. Frank then asked if the Count's son was also present, since that wasn't part of the original agreement. Jamal replied that Grizzlane had shown up on his own, so they could consider it a bonus. Grizzlane understood at that moment that he had been betrayed. He said that Jamal had sold them out, and asked him if he really thought he would get away with it. But Jamal replied that he should worry about himself, because they both just needed to get out of that rotten place. He said that soon the Perdium family would fall, and that he wasn't the only one desperate to escape that fate. It was then that Grizzlane, without hesitation, made a cut in his own chest as part of his technique, and brutally advanced. No one had time to react, and everyone was completely stunned as Grizzlane broke Jamal in half with a single blow. He looked at the fallen body and thought that this was not something that could erase the betrayal he had committed. Then he turned towards Philip. Philip, overcome with despair, grabbed Helena, trying to use her as a shield. He wondered how a weakling like Grizzlane had killed Jamal like that. But before he could think of any plan, Grizzlane plunged a blade straight into his forehead, killing him instantly. As soon as Philip fell, Helena ran crying into her brother's arms. One of the assassins standing next to Frank looked at him suspiciously and asked if that really was the Count's son, since they had heard rumors that he was a weakling with no experience whatsoever. Frank, surprised, said that at least that was what they said. But what had just happened showed otherwise, as Grizzlane had attacked with precision and killed 2 experienced knights in just a few seconds. What's more, all his attacks were clearly infused with mana. Helena, still trembling and crying, looked at her brother in his arms and, without understanding what was happening, desperately searched for an explanation. Only at that moment, Grizzlane realized that Helena was in shock, trembling in his arms, so he carefully passed her out and laid her down beside him, telling her that she needed to rest there for a moment while he sorted out the situation. Frank, observing the scene, thanked Grizzlane for having rid them of those 2 idiots and commented that he was quite different from what they had said. He then asked if he had been hiding his abilities all along. Grizzlane, looking serious, replied that it didn't matter. As he watched the opponents ahead, he thought that there were 3 enemies. The 2 in the corners looked weak, but the one in the center, Frank, had an extremely high mana level. Grizzlane knew that his body wasn't ready for a long fight yet, so he needed to end it quickly. Before starting the fight, he decided to ask who had hired Frank. Frank, with an arrogant smile, said that it didn't matter, since he was going to die soon. Grizzlane had expected such an answer, but thought that he would soon open his mouth. One of the assassins asked if he could be taken care of soon, but Frank told him to keep him alive. He said that the Duke would lose his mind if he knew that the Count's son had been killed so quickly, and that the more pain they suffered, the better the corpses would look. The assassins advanced against Grizzlane, but he suddenly picked up a candle and threw it in their direction. The gesture caused confusion, but it was all just a distraction. Taking advantage of the gap, Grizzlane plunged his sword right into the forehead of one of them, killing him on the spot. The other assassin called Grizzlane dirty for using low tricks, but still attacked. Grizzlane, on his back, blocked the blow with ease, using his hand to interrupt the movement of the enemy's sword, seize his weapon, and then lop off his head with a clean cut. Soon afterwards, a new attack approached, and once again, Grizzlane managed to block it with his back turned. Frank watched and wondered if it was really possible. Just then, Grizzlane turned quickly, dodged the blow, and made a cut across Frank's neck. His enemy narrowly managed to dodge, but still had his pipe cut and received a deep wound to the neck. Even though he was wounded, Frank reacted with a counterattack, forcing Grizzlane to defend himself with both swords at the same time. Frank said he was surprised, because if Grizzlane hadn't had so much mana, he would have died instantly. Grizzlane was also thinking about how he had survived the previous attack, and soon realized that he had probably concentrated his mana to regenerate the wound. Frank, looking at him, said that he had no idea where Grizzlane had learned that strange swordplay, but that it would be the end of him. He began to pressure him even more, saying that that filthy mana wouldn't save him, and that death was certain. But then Grizzlane gave a slight smile. Frank saw this and felt a chill. At that moment, Grizzlane used his own body to dodge the enemy's blow, spun in the air and landed a direct kick to Frank's face, knocking him backwards. Frank tried to scoff again, saying that his mana wouldn't work, but suddenly he felt a sharp pain in his chest and spat out blood. He wondered when Grizzlane had become so powerful. Grizzlane, now more serious, said that he hadn't expected the culprit to be someone so strong, but now he knew who was responsible for her death in his past life. It was then that Grizzlane activated his 3rd mana core, and Frank was shocked to see that he had gathered so much energy in such a short space of time. With that, Grizzlane advanced with impressive speed. Frank could barely react, dodging the attacks clumsily while being completely pressed. His body trembled just trying to defend himself, and even his sword began to crack. He thought it was impossible for a human of that age to possess so much mana, and he felt that Grizzlane seemed like a completely different person. Then Grizzlane broke Frank's sword with a powerful blow, made a deep cut in his chest, and then used his 2nd sword to pierce Frank's stomach, who screamed in pain and spat out blood. Grizzlane then pressed Frank's head against the floor and said that now they were going to finish the conversation. He wanted to know who had hired Frank. Frank, silent and with blood dripping from his mouth, discreetly pulled out a hidden dagger. He thought it wasn't over yet, and that at least he would be able to finish the job before he died. Then, as Frank prepared to throw his hidden dagger, Grizzlane had already bound his hand with several invisible strands of mana and was watching calmly. At that moment, he proposed a deal and said that they could talk, making it clear that there was still a chance that Frank would make it out alive if he cooperated. Frank, under pressure and with no way out, began to answer everything he asked. Grizzlane, without hesitation, pulled his sword back from his enemy's stomach, while Frank belatedly realized that those lines of mana had been created around his body, and he didn't even know when Grizzlane had done it. Grizzlane commented that he was sure someone of Frank's caliber would accept that offer, but warned that if his sword remained there for too long, his mana core would be destroyed. It was at that moment that Grizzlane aimed with precision directly at Frank's mana core, who soon noticed an overload taking place inside him. The mana was leaking out dangerously, and Frank felt his body destabilize. He shouted that Grizzlane was crazy because a single wrong move could cause a mana explosion that would kill them both instantly. But Grizzlane, without losing his cool, replied that this was the work of weak people. He knew how to control his mana and would avoid death himself. As for Frank, he wasn't so sure. At that moment, Frank thought that Grizzlane wasn't lying. He really could die right then and there. Then, under pressure, Frank finally confessed. He said that Count Desmond was responsible for everything. He had been sent there with the mission of killing Helena, because Count Desmond needed a reason to start a war between the Perdium family and the Degard family. When he heard that, Grizzlane thought coldly that it made sense. So it was Desmond who was to blame. He remembered that, in his past life, dirty jobs like this were only done by families allied to the House of Ka. And now he wondered how Duke Delphine had managed to orchestrate something so ridiculous. Grizzlane, with a firm look on his face, asked if that was exactly why they had decided to kill Helena. But before Frank could say anything, Grizzlane plunged the sword further into his body, going completely through his chest. Frank, struggling to breathe, asked why he had done it, since he had told him everything. But Grizzlane, glaring at him, said that Frank had lied to so many people throughout his life that now he had no right to hear the truth. Frank let out a weak laugh, saying that nothing would change. The job was done. The war was going to start anyway. Grizzlane coolly pushed his head against the floor and declared that this was not a repeat. He had died and been reborn in that body, so this time everything would be different. Immediately afterwards, a huge overload of mana exploded in Frank's body, destroying everything around him. But at that very moment, a fireworks display began at the festival, and the explosion was completely masked by the noise and lights in the sky. After all the slaughter, Grizzlane took one last look around and saw that Helena was still sleeping peacefully without having witnessed anything that had happened. Relieved, he put his sword down, took a deep breath, and tried to calm down. Soon afterwards, however, he fell to his knees and started vomiting blood. His body had exceeded its limits. He knew he wasn't ready to use the third mana core yet, but he still thought he wasn't going to die there. It was then that Grizzlane spotted one of the nearby houses, ran to the door, and broke it down so that he could take cover. Inside, he found something that confirmed his suspicions. In his past life, they had found bodies other than Helena's, and the body in front of him now was that of Count Degard's son, dead next to the escort. That explained everything. That was how the blame had fallen on the Perdium family. And now, with all this about to come to light, he knew that a war was about to begin. So of course Grizzlane knew he had to erase all the evidence. Later, he left the scene with Helena, after setting fire to the entire slum. But at that moment, there was someone watching them from afar. This mysterious hooded figure disappeared soon after. Later, this same person appeared in front of a group gathered around a round table and announced that the mission had been a failure. The council members at the table were surprised and asked how it had all gone wrong. The assassin, barely able to speak because of his injuries, replied that it was all Grizzlane Perdium's fault. Immediately, everyone reacted with contempt, asking if he was really referring to that useless man who never did anything. The whole table agreed that Grizzlane would never have been able to handle such a serious mission. While the members of the table jeered, saying that the murderer was just trying to justify his own incompetence, he replied firmly. He said that Grizzlane was completely different from what was stated in the reports and rumors. Everything he saw shocked him. Grizzlane dealt with everyone as if they were insignificant, and even burned any evidence of what had happened. It was as if he were a completely different person. Despite this, the assassin claimed that they had already settled everything with the Degard family, so starting a war would no longer be a problem. He then asked for another chance to redeem himself. However, the majority of the table started shouting at him, calling him incompetent, and ordering him to be eliminated immediately. Just then, a calmer voice interrupted the commotion. It was a man who seemed to be the real leader of the group. He commented that it was getting too noisy and asked what kind of chance the killer wanted. The assassin, determined, said that this time he would kill Grizzlane himself. One of the council members commented that, naturally, it would have to be done in a duel. The assassin replied that he already had someone in mind, Cain Loges. Everyone was silent. The name was familiar. The assassin explained that Cain Loges was famous for his fighting style, based completely on strength. Despite his young age, there was no one physically stronger than him in the whole of the North. What's more, Cain was Grizzlane's cousin, so arranging a meeting between the two wouldn't be difficult. Everyone began to ponder the idea. The leader was thoughtful and said he accepted, but made it clear that if the assassin failed again, there would be no next time. The assassin replied that he wouldn't let him down. The next day, in the training room at Perdium Castle, Fergus entered to say that it was almost time for lunch. However, a blade flew towards him, almost hitting him. Before he could be hurt, Grizzlane pulled the blade back using invisible strands of mana, as if controlling them with his mind. He wielded the sword again, and said that would be enough for now. It was at this point that he noticed Fergus in the room and asked what he was doing there. Fergus apologized for interrupting the training session, but couldn't help asking how Grizzlane had done it. Then Grizzlane showed him the thread of mana he had created. He was materializing his own mana to use it as if it were a real thread, something he had done all the time in his past life. Currently, however, he needed to activate at least his second mana core to be able to use that ability, as his body still lacked energy. Even so, if he only created one thread, he could still use his technique to a limited extent. Fergus, impressed, said that he had trained all his life, but had never seen anything like it. He remembered that Grizzlane barely used mana in the past, let alone trained seriously. Now, however, he was able to manipulate mana like that. Grizzlane, for his part, asked what exactly Fergus wanted with him. Fergus replied that he had only gone to thank him for protecting the young lady. Grizzlane replied that he hadn't done anything much, just what needed to be done, and suggested that they go for lunch straight away. It was then explained that a few days had passed since the incident, and the festival had been paused, which was understandable, since a knight had tried to kidnap Helena. During this time, Helena remained angry because no one believed that it was her brother who had saved her. She told Grizzlane to tell people the truth, but he replied that there was no point, because no one would really believe her. Belinda, upon hearing this, commented that she had always known that those two knights were perverts. Grizzlane, however, didn't care about recognition. He thought the most important thing was that Helena had survived. Besides, he had managed to prevent a war, but he also knew that this was not the end. His enemies certainly wouldn't give up so easily, and he wouldn't be able to stop everything by himself forever. He knew that he now needed a military force. It was then that the food finally arrived. Grizzlane, tired, looked at the plate in front of him and thought that he urgently needed more political power to solve everything that was about to happen. But when he looked at what was on the plate, he saw only a small piece of sliced bread. He was silent for a moment, then looked confused and asked why they were starting with that. Belinda, with her arms crossed, replied by asking if he really didn't know what the current situation was. Before she could explain, shouts began to be heard outside. Through the window, everyone could see an angry crowd forming in front of the castle. People were shouting for compensation for the damage caused and for the cancellation of the festival. They were furious because they had lost a lot of money since they depended on the festival for sales and business. Several guards and employees were trying to calm the population, but they were not succeeding. The revolt was growing. Grizzlane, perplexed, asked what was going on. Belinda, already expecting it, said that she knew it would happen. She explained that the county made a lot of profit from the merchants during the festival. The previous year, the profits had been excellent, but now, with the cancellation, everyone was angry, especially the merchants who had prepared everything in advance. Grizzlane wondered if the situation was really that bad. In his mind, he concluded that, yes, it was serious, and if they didn't do something immediately, the population would become increasingly aggressive. He turned to Fergus and asked what the soldiers were doing and why they hadn't calmed the crowd yet. Fergus, with a tense expression, replied that they had no soldiers available. Most of them had been sent to the guard post in the monster forest, where they were rebuilding the defenses after the orcish attack. It was then explained that the Perdium family's territory was surrounded by problems. On one side, they suffered constant attacks from the barbarians to the north. On the other side, there was the forest of monsters, where creatures could come out at any time and invade the villages. The border was always in conflict, leaving the region in a constant state of war. Grizzlane thought to himself that the situation was completely out of control. No money, no soldiers, and now no support from the people. It was a total mess. He then pulled Belinda into a corner and asked her directly if she was the one who managed the family's money. When she confirmed this, he said that they needed to use these funds to calm the people down immediately. But Belinda, crossing her arms, replied that there was no money left. Count Perdium himself had cut off all their allowance because Grizzlane had spent too much on nonsense in the past. Grizzlane stood still for a moment, surprised until the truth hit him. He thought he was broke, so, without thinking twice, he asked Belinda for a loan, but she replied that she had nothing either. Then he looked at them both and wondered aloud what was left. With no money, no soldiers, and no support from the people, he thought that even if he had a foresight of what was to come, it wouldn't do any good if he didn't have the resources to act. He wondered if there was really nothing that could be done. It was at that moment that a soldier appeared and caught his eye. It was Ricardo, and Grizzlane immediately noticed that he was panting and hurrying. He asked why Ricardo was running like that, and Ricardo, still out of breath, replied that there was a big problem. Young Master Kane wanted to see Grizzlane. When Grizzlane heard that name, his eyes widened. He murmured in a low, surprised voice, wondering if it was really Kane who was there. And at that moment, Commander Scoven was completely beaten up, taking a lot of punishment from someone, even though he was wearing heavy armor. The other person, using only his bare fists, was able to finish him off without difficulty. It was then that Grizzlane appeared, and Scovan, though wounded, recognized his presence and asked if he was the young master. Grizzlane was not at all happy with what he saw until a voice caught his attention. It was a huge man with bulging muscles who smiled and said that he had finally arrived. That man was Kane, the heir to the county of Logus, an ally of the Perdium family. When they were younger, he was Grizzlane's only friend, but also his only enemy. As Kane approached, Grizzlane asked Ricardo what was going on. Ricardo explained that they had responded to an urgent call because of a disturbance inside the tavern, and that there they had found Kane breaking things up with his escort. He just wanted to know if the rumors about Grizzlane were true, but when Scovan tried to explain the situation and all the details, Kane simply grabbed his face and told him he was lying. Ricardo confirmed that this had indeed happened. Kane then said that he hadn't gone there to listen to lies, and that when he heard that Grizzlane, without ever having trained, had defeated an orc with his bare hands, he couldn't help himself and ended up hitting Scovan for making up stories. Kane said that none of this would have happened if he had told the truth from the beginning. Meanwhile, Grizzlane stared at Kane and remembered that he had always been like that, treating him like a subordinate. Every time he visited Perdium territory, he caused trouble, but no one reprimanded him. Unlike him, who was always criticized and carried a strong sense of inferiority, Kane's confident attitude and arrogance were seen as qualities of a true heir, while Grizzlane was never forgiven for his shortcomings. He thought that was why he had always been criticized so much. Kane was surprised by Grizzlane's calm reaction, as normally he would have been angry at such provocation. Then it was explained that some time ago in Logus County, someone had made Kane an offer. A mysterious assassin from the so-called Round Table said that if he killed Grizzlane Perdium, it would bring benefits to his family. The man claimed that he could make it all look like an accident during a simulated duel between heirs. That way, Grizzlane could die without arousing suspicion, as if it were just an unfortunate incident. At the time, Kane found it strange to have to kill his own cousin, but he didn't turn down the offer. Deep down, he wondered why they wanted to eliminate Grizzlane and what had changed in him. With a mischievous smile, Kane watched Grizzlane standing there, not reacting, and found it even more suspicious. He thought that every time the two met, Grizzlane's subordinate must have brought him something good, as he always did. He commented that he had heard that the festival had been cancelled, so he was hoping to eat everything that wasn't served. That was how it worked. Grizzlane always brought something for him to indulge in. He asked if he was wrong to expect that. Grizzlane thought for a moment and understood that he was talking about the promise he had made. Kane always looked forward to beer and available women when they met, and Grizzlane, for fear of being beaten up, had actually promised that. Because of Kane, he had already lost a lot of money. He also remembered Belinda's warning that the Lord had cut off his allowance, and it was then that he realized something important. Right in front of him was the real source of his money. Kane shouted for Grizzlane, demanding that he bring everything he had promised immediately because he had been waiting too long. Grizzlane said yes, he would bring everything, but he thought to himself that Kane still had a huge debt to pay. Even the assassin watching the scene was a little surprised at the way things were turning out. Kane asked with irritation what he had to pay. Grizzlane, without hesitation, replied that everything he had done for him had been with his own money, and that now was the time to collect. He said the total amount was 1,000 euro coins. Kane thought this was absurd, saying that what Grizzlane had spent on him was no more than 100 coins. He tried to argue that it had all been done out of gratitude for being friends, but Grizzlane made it clear that no amount of friendship could pay for that. He said that he had spent a long time just being his servant, and that now he wanted payment before he was forced to beat him to death. He also said that he was in desperate need of money. The place was completely silent. Everyone was shocked by Grizzlane's statement. Ricardo couldn't understand why the young master had said something like that, but Kane, still seated, stood up slowly. He said that Grizzlane was overconfident, only because he was taking the situation too lightly. He said that the rumors about Grizzlane's new strength were all false, and that he was nothing more than a parasite. That's why everyone called him the scoundrel heir. Then, in a rage, he prepared a punch and promised to return Grizzlane to the place he should never have left. But Grizzlane dodged easily. Kane got even angrier and tried another blow, which also missed. Grizzlane then landed a precise punch to Kane's ribs, causing Kane to spit blood on the spot. Even though he was hurt, Kane reacted with a direct punch to the face, but Grizzlane managed to block it. And even in the face of his opponent's strength, Grizzlane showed no desperation. Soon after, Kane fell to his knees, spitting even more blood, clearly weakened. The assassin, who had been watching the scene, approached and asked if Kane was all right. But Grizzlane, with contempt, said that he was exaggerating, since he knew that the attack had been blocked. The assassin, irritated, ordered Grizzlane to step aside and asked him what he thought he was doing. He then shouted to everyone in the bar that they had seen it with their own eyes. Grizzlane had attacked Kane as if he were a criminal. Grizzlane laughed quietly. I thought that was exactly the plan. Kane then asked the assassin how his performance had been, and the man confirmed that it had been excellent. Everything had been done perfectly to make it look like an accident, which was enough to justify an official duel. Kane understood that this was the ideal opportunity to put an end to the decadent Perdium family and make the Loges family rise even higher. Kane, with a hard look on his face, wondered how Grizzlane had dared to do that. He He picked up a glove, the traditional symbol of dueling, and prepared to throw it. But Grizzlane was quicker. He threw his own gloves right in Kane's face and loudly declared that he was challenging him to a duel. Even Kane couldn't believe the audacity. Grizzlane claimed that Kane had humiliated and insulted the heir of Perdium in front of everyone, and even injured his personal knight. He said that he couldn't refuse this challenge now. Kane looked surprised, but then smiled. He said that he already knew Grizzlane was crazy, but he didn't think he was so crazy as to dig his own grave. He picked up his sword and said that he would accept the duel, and that Grizzlane shouldn't regret it afterwards. But Grizzlane showed no fear. On the contrary, he seemed prepared. Suddenly, Grizzlane called Richard and ordered him to gather all the merchants who were protesting in front of the castle. He told everyone to bring a good amount of money. It was explained once again that the festival had suddenly been canceled. The lively atmosphere that had taken over the city had been frozen, leaving the tourists disappointed. Everyone was frustrated and wanted to spend their money on some kind of event. Grizzlane thought that in situations like this, it was necessary to create something that would catch everyone's attention, even if it was just a single thing. At that moment, everyone present was watching the duel between the two heirs, Kane and Grizzlane. As a result, people started selling drinks, setting up food stalls, and even organizing bets as if they were at a festival. The merchants made a lot of money. Kane, with his sword already stuck in the ground, asked with contempt how Grizzlane had the nerve to turn a sacred place into a real gambling brothel. He declared that his sword would only rest when Grizzlane surrendered. But Grizzlane, analyzing everything, realized that this had probably been part of the plan all along. He said that there was enough of a crowd and that they could start the duel. The killer, however, interrupted, telling them to wait. He said it was clear that the betting scheme didn't seem fair. The person in charge of the betting confirmed it. He said that no one had bet on Grizzlane winning, and that if he did, no one would receive any money. Then Grizzlane briefly looked away, analyzing the situation, while the assassin commented that, to be fair, the outcome of the duel couldn't be that obvious, since Grizzlane didn't stand a chance against Master Kane. Kane himself laughed at the situation and commented that even the bookie was ignoring Grizzlane, asking if it wasn't better to change the rules of the bet. It was at that moment that Scovan appeared, still bruised but with determination in his eyes. He put all his money on the table and declared that he was betting on Master Grizzlane. This made Grizzlane smile discreetly. Just then, a new bag of money appeared. It was Helena and Belinda's money. The crowd stood in shock, murmuring amongst themselves. Many wondered if it was true, since Helena never got involved in betting. Helena firmly confirmed that the amount was enough. Belinda, on the other hand, tried to absolve herself of responsibility, saying that she had warned Helena not to do it. But the man in charge of the betting confirmed that with that amount, the balance between the sides was guaranteed. The killer, however, was not at all happy with the turn of events. Kane, visibly irritated, asked if they really had the courage to do this, even though they knew Grizzlane would lose. Grizzlane calmly replied that he was older than Kane and that it would be unfair to start by attacking first. Drawing his sword, he said that he would give Kane the advantage. Kane glared at his rival and sneered, saying that it was too late to pretend to be the older man in charge. The duel began immediately afterwards. Kane advanced with brute force, like a real hurricane, but Grizzlane managed to block the attack, even with some difficulty. Kane said it was too late for regrets. With an aggressive sequence, he managed to open Grizzlane's guard, but the latter dodged in time. However, Kane didn't care about technique. He picked up his sword like a hammer and swung it violently, determined to crush Grizzlane by any means. The crowd commented that it was as expected. Grizzlane could never take a direct hit from Kane. Grizzlane, for his part, thought that Kane was still the same old scoundrel. Belinda became desperate, shouting that they had to get Grizzlane out of there immediately because he was going to die. The killer was watching everything closely and believed it was already too late. For him, Grizzlane had fallen into the trap. Kane's plan was simple and efficient: wear down his opponent until he could no longer stand up, and then deliver the final blow. This was how Kane won his duels. But to his surprise, he realized that Grizzlane was much better than before. He admitted that he hadn't expected him to improve so much, and said that it made sense for him to dodge so well, since he had always run away from him in the past. Kane then began to strike Grizzlane's sword with force, as if he were using a baton, trying to disarm him by force. In a powerful move, Kane threw his own sword into the air, making the blade rise until it almost disappeared into the sky. Everyone present was stunned and frightened by what they were witnessing. The assassin believed that this was the end. He thought that Grizzlane would no longer be able to defend himself, and that, when he fell, he would die. But when he started to fall, Grizzlane calmly said that he wished he had taken it easy on Kane. Using his mana, he stepped firmly on the ground, as if he were completely intact. Then he looked his opponent in the eye and said that Kane had crossed the line. Grizzlane then jumps up very quickly and lands a direct cut to Kane's ribs. The assassin realizes that Grizzlane has managed to land on his feet because of the mana accumulated in his legs, but Grizzlane just laughs, keeping a calm look on his face. He comments that Kane's fencing is very ignorant, that he must think he's strong just because he's muscular muscular and scares his enemies, Grizzlane, with his brutal attacks. But that now he's going to open Kane's eyes to the truth. Kane, irritated, prepares to attack, but when he tries, Grizzlane kicks him in the hand, completely unbalancing his movement. Grizzlane then hits several parts of Kane's body at once. Kane becomes even more furious and tries a thrust but misses again. At that moment, Grizzlane steps on his sword with ease and makes a precise cut across Kane's neck without any hesitation. Grizzlane's gaze remains cool and calm throughout the fight. Suddenly, all of Kane's wounds open up at once, and the audience is completely shocked, trying to understand what has just happened. Many despair, including those who bet on him, saying they regretted putting their money on Kane. Helena then comments to Belinda, while Scoven gives a discreet little smile. The assassin panics, and Kane, lying down, thinks that this last attack could have killed him for real, as it was so precise that it could have gone through his body. He wonders how Grizzlane managed to evolve so much. Kane faces Grizzlane, who continues to look serious and emotionless. At this point, Grizzlane throws his own sword away and says that the difference between their skills isn't enough to entertain the audience, so he's going to continue the fight using only his fists. Kane, furious, asks how he dares to do this, but Grizzlane says that this is the only way to teach him something. According to Grizzlane, nothing teaches better than being punched in the face. Kane, indignant, asks if he's talking about educating him, and Grizzlane replies that yes, since Kane is no match for him in fencing, he'll just go for the fist now. He also declares that he's going to bet another 2,000 golds, doubling the bet that he'll win. The audience is confused, commenting that this wasn't supposed to be a duel, and the assassin, who is still in shock, thinks that now that Grizzlane is fighting Kane without weapons, he will surely lose. He believes that his plan isn't over yet. The person in charge of the betting calls everyone to place new bets, now that the fight has turned into a hand-to-hand combat. Some say they'll bet on Kane, thinking it's crazy to fight without weapons, but others believe Grizzlane could do well, as he's still quite confident. Kane laughs scornfully, saying that fighting with just his fists is ridiculous, then picks up his sword and declares that if Grizzlane wants to fight with his hands, fine, but he'll stick with his sword. Belinda watches the whole thing and comments that he's an asshole. Kane then prepares to kill Grizzlane, but Grizzlane quickly dodges the blow, turns his body agilely, and lands a straight punch to Kane's knee, followed by another straight punch to his chin. Kane falls backwards, spitting blood, not understanding what is happening. He wonders how Grizzlane knows so many moves like that, while the crowd cheers and comments on the blow. Grizzlane tells Kane to get up, saying he hasn't even started his lesson for the day. Kane, enraged, charges recklessly with his sword, but Grizzlane easily deflects all his attacks. As he fell, Kane realized that Grizzlane had never looked him in the eye before. He had always served him in silence, but now the situation was different. He wasn't just losing, he was being completely crushed. While he thinks he has to kill Grizzlane to protect his family, he keeps getting beaten up. He is punched in the face, in the stomach, kneed, elbowed, and spends many minutes being violently hit. When he's all purple, bruised, and bleeding, Grizzlane pulls Kane's hair and says he feels sorry for his father. He explains that Count Logis, Kane's father, helped Grizzlane's father, the leader of the Purd family, when he was on the verge of death, just out of friendship. But now, his son, Count Logis, has a completely different mindset. Kane, wounded and panting, remembers Grizzlane's words as the weight of everything begins to fall on him. It is explained that a few years ago, Lord Purdium was on the verge of death, and Count Logis was the one who went to help him. At the time, people asked him if he would visit Lord Purdium again, since it had only been a week since his last visit, and yet he said yes, he would visit his friend again. Kane tried to convince his father not to go, just as others tried to stop him, but Count Logis continued with his decision to visit his friend. When asked why he was doing this, he simply replied that it was because they were friends, and Kane, upon hearing this, understood that there really was no other reason than the sincere friendship between the two. At this point, Kane had already accepted internally that he was going to be punched again by Grizzlane. But Grizzlane didn't hit him. Instead, he holds out his hand to help him up. Kane looks at the hand for a moment, lowers his head, and admits defeat. No one expected this, not even the killer, who is completely distraught by the scene. Meanwhile, the audience cheers and celebrates, happy at Grizzlane's victory. Helena, thrilled, celebrates by saying that her brother has won. But suddenly, the killer climbs into the arena in a rage and starts shouting at Kane, asking him how he dares to admit defeat like that. He asks if Kane knows what he's doing, since he trusted him. Only Kane replies that he doesn't want that deal anymore and sends the assassin away. The man panics, realizing that his whole plan has failed. Then Grizzlane, observing the scene, declares a mangacaps, whereas the man must now do his duty and get rid of the territory's enemies. The assassin, confused, asks what he means by that. Grizzlane, quite naturally, announces loudly for everyone to hear that the man in the hood has volunteered to pay for all the food and drink for those watching. The audience celebrates enthusiastically, shouting for free food. The assassin tries to protest by saying that he didn't agree to it, but Grizzlane just puts his hand firmly on his shoulder and says that that this is the price for losing the duel. He reminds him that the man has all that gold in his pocket, and if he pays everyone's bill, it won't be deducted from the bet. Grizzlane then squeezes his shoulder harder and warns him that is going to add another 1,000 gold to the bet, since he doubled the amount before the fight. He warns him that if he tries to run away, the consequences will be much worse. The assassin, defeated and silent, simply replies that he has understood, while Grizzlane leaves the arena with the two of them kneeling before him as the absolute victor. The next day, back at Perdium Castle, Grizzlane is in his room and opens a chest full of gold. He thinks that with that money, he could hire a small group of mercenaries, but he also knows that the financial return on such a decision can take time, so he needs to be careful before investing his money. Belinda and Helena are in the room with him, smiling. Grizzlane, surprised by the looks on their faces, asks what's going on. Helena asks how he plans to spend all that money, and he asks her back, wondering if she wants anything. She replies that she's just asking, but Belinda, laughing, comments that it's obvious where he's going to spend it. He says that it will soon be Miss Amelia's birthday, and he's sure to buy her a big present. Helena then begins to wonder if he did it all because of his fiancée. And Grizzlane, confused, thinks to himself, asking, "Wait a minute, I have a fiancé?" Grizzlane actually asks out loud if he has a fiancé, completely confused by the situation. Belinda, embarrassed, replies that he doesn't, but Helena corrects her, saying that yes, it's Amelia from Rayfold. At that moment, Grizzlane becomes desperate at hearing that name until he begins to remember. That woman, Amelia Rayfold, the noble among the nobles, famous for her pure and kind actions, someone who didn't use her status and still won the support of the people with ease. However, Grizzlane also remembers that she would soon start a rebellion and become known as the Witch of the North. She would ally herself with Duke Delphine to destroy the Perdium, and that would make him see her as a traitor. With this thought in mind, Grizzlane gives a little smile and asks how long it will be before his father returns. Belinda says she's not sure, maybe a week. Grizzlane concludes that this should be enough time. He says he's leaving for Rayfold County, and Belinda, surprised, says it's not even Amelia's birthday yet, wondering why he's in such a hurry. Grizzlane replies that he's just going to get her money. Meanwhile, in Rayfold County, Amelia holds up a shoe embroidered with shiny details and offers it to a poor child standing in front of her. The child hesitates and asks if Miss Amelia really intends to do that. Amelia, with a calm smile, replies that if there is anyone barefoot in her territory, it should be her, not the people. She then orders her guards to provide food and shelter for the child. The mobilization is immediate. Several boxes of supplies are gathered, and everyone around is deeply impressed and grateful. Afterwards, Amelia goes off with her soldiers. Later, in the garden of her mansion, she talks to her escort knight, Bernaf, who praises her attitude, saying that she has acted well, as always. Amelia comments that her father demanded blind obedience from the people, but that, in the end, people always follow those who offer shelter and food. Bernaf agrees and says that by doing so, she has won people's hearts and that she will undoubtedly prove that she is the rightful successor to the throne. Amelia stares at Bernaf for a moment and suddenly puts her foot in his face as a provocation. She then asks what happened to the duel against the best sword in the north. Bernaf apologizes, saying it was all to avoid unnecessary tension, and advises Amelia not to show her claws yet, as his blade will always be at her service. Amelia, with a serious tone, replies that she has invested too much in him and therefore forbids him to be weak. She then asks about the Merchant Guild's business, and Bernaf explains that if she's talking about the Arctium Guild, she can rest assured. All the materials used to rebuild the Beast Forest, which was destroyed by the orc attacks, were bought by this guild. They are also recovering the support funds that had been sent to Perdium territory. In addition, they have recruited all the soldiers who left Perdium, including those with elite training. Amelia, pleased with the progress, advises them to maintain the appearance of a simple merchant guild. They mustn't allow their true identity to be revealed prematurely. Just then, the butler appears and asks to be excused. Bernaf, annoyed, asks who allowed him in, since the lady was resting. The butler replies that he has received a report from the entrance gate, and that young Master Grizzlane is there to see Miss Amelia. Amelia, surprised and annoyed, asks why that brat has appeared there. The butler nervously informs her that Grizzlane said he had something important to discuss about the Merchant Guild. This leaves both Amelia and Bernaf deeply shocked. Later in the drawing room, the two finally meet face to face. Grizzlane appears well-groomed and politely greets, "Hello, Amelia." Not even her cat seems to like his presence. Amelia, keeping her posture, comments that it's a bit disrespectful of him to have come unannounced, and asks if he's ever had a lesson in etiquette. Grizzlane, keeping his smile, replies that her birthday is coming up, and that he's brought her a present in advance. He hands over a flower, saying that he bought it from a nearby merchant guild, and that the fragrance was wonderful. He also says that he intends to start planting this flower, and, in an apparently casual tone, mentions the name of the Arctium Guild. Asking if it wasn't the same one, Amelia immediately stares at him intensely and stands up, saying that she doesn't know what he's talking about. She then says that, now that he has received the gift, he can leave. Grizzlane orders Amelia to sit down immediately in a firm, authoritative voice. She feels a strange pressure invade the room and wonders where it is coming from. She is shocked to realize that the same young man who could barely hold a conversation with a woman is now exerting so much pressure on her. Grizzlane says he'll get straight to the point and says he needs money. He asks for 10,001 gold, saying that this amount will be enough. Amelia, confused, asks what he means by that. She wants to know if he really came to visit her just to ask for money for his fiancée, and also asks if this request was made by Lord Perdium. But Grizzlane coolly replies that it has nothing to do with his father and insists that he wants the money now. He then asks if she wasn't planning to marry him. Amelia is completely shocked by the question. Grizzlane continues talking, asking her to take her own escort knight into consideration, using him as an example. He says that, although it seems impossible, if she really wants to become a leader, she needs to think seriously about the kind of power she is building. Before continuing, he tries to talk about the secret construction of her political force in Rayfold, but at this point, Amelia's cat almost attacks him, reacting aggressively. Amelia, annoyed, tells him that she doesn't want to hear that kind of thing, not even as a joke, but Grizzlane, unfazed, replies that she doesn't need to worry, because he'll keep the secret. However, he warns her that he can't keep such information for free. He says that in order to keep it quiet, he needs something in return. Amelia denies it on the spot, saying that it will never happen. Then she calls Bernaf, her escort knight. Bernaf introduces himself politely, saying that it's been a while since he last saw Lord Grizzlane. Grizzlane, looking at him, recognizes this man as the one who is always by Amelia's side, and thinks that Bernaf has the potential to become the best sword in the north. Grizzlane then warns her that if he dies there, a war will break out. He asks her if she is aware of this. Amelia, with a calm smile, says that of course she is. She says that she is going to tell the audience just that a bandit from another land has invaded Rayfold to rob the people, and that his escort knight has killed him to protect everyone. After that, she gives the order for Bernaf to finish him off. Bernaf draws his sword, and Grizzlane realizes that there's no way out. If they want to settle it by force, then he's going to fight too. They both prepare for the confrontation, but suddenly Bernaf gives an enigmatic little smile. Grizzlane realizes that something is wrong. He senses a presence behind him, and at the same moment, an assassin appears and plunges a sword straight into the sofa where he was standing. With one swift movement, Grizzlane lifts the sofa and uses it as a shield, then kicks the killer hard in the stomach, throwing the man out of the window. Everyone around is shocked by the scene, completely impressed by his reaction. Grizzlane sarcastically comments that the whole thing is tremendously rude. He says that Rayfold County's hospitality was mediocre. He then goes off on Bernaf, asking if the county doesn't offer etiquette classes. Bernaf, glaring at Grizzlane, replies that he's been rude from the start. According to him, it was Grizzlane himself who acted rudely, and so he sees no reason to be polite to someone so rude. He then caught Grizzlane's sword with his arm and tried to hit him, but Grizzlane quickly dodged. Grizzlane then made a counter maneuver to retrieve his sword and managed to land a strong kick to Bernaf's stomach, who was thrown away. Bernaf thought he had heard that Grizzlane was just a dog that barked but didn't bite. Now he realized that this rumor was completely wrong. Amelia watched everything and wondered why Bernaf was suffering against a child like that. She thought that if he really wanted to prove that he was worthy of being her sword, he would have to kill Grizzlane and hand over his head. Bernaf looked at Amelia seriously and promised that he wouldn't let her down. After that, he told Grizzlane to go all out. Grizzlane didn't understand how someone like Bernaf dared to give him orders, but he thought that if he wanted it that badly, then he would do it. Bernaf advanced with a quick thrust of his rapier, and Grizzlane had to dodge nimbly. Even so, he was grazed on the cheek and realized that Bernaf was faster than he looked. The duel between the two became more and more intense, with blows exchanged rapidly. Amelia watched everything and couldn't understand how that useless brat was managing to fight Bernaf on equal terms. Even so, she believed there was a clear difference between them. It was then that Bernaf managed to hit the hilt of Grizzlane's sword just as he was attacking. It seemed like a perfect loophole, and Bernaf once again trapped his sword with an agile move. But Grizzlane didn't fall into the same trap twice, and responded with the same counter maneuver. Only this time, Bernaf was also prepared, and said that it wouldn't work with him again either. So he threw Grizzlane hard to the ground. While Grizzlane was vulnerable, Bernaf advanced with all his might, but Grizzlane reacted quickly, kicked the enemy's sword, and got up. He noticed that Bernaf was using mana to increase his movements, and even so, Bernaf commented that Grizzlane was very different from what the rumors said. That style of fencing wasn't something you could learn with ordinary training. He seemed to have years of experience in battle. Then he asked if he had ever fought barbarians, because Grizzlane's style was exactly like theirs. He said that it might work on the battlefield, but against him, it wouldn't work. Then he said that would be the end of Grizzlane. Grizzlane thought the fight was harder than he had expected. Burnoff's blows were precise and always aimed at his head. The size difference between them made it even more difficult. It was an opponent he shouldn't be facing right now, but Grizzlane had no time to lose, so he decided to end it. He summoned a thread of mana, and by the time Burnoff realized there was a line in the air, it was too late. Grizzlane drew his sword hard, causing it to hit Burnoff straight in the head. With that gap, Grizzlane landed a knee right in his face. Burnoff couldn't understand what had just happened. Even Amelia was distraught. Grizzlane retrieved his sword and almost hit Burnoff in the face, who had to defend himself with extreme speed. Now it seemed that Grizzlane had turned the fight. Burnoff shouted for Amelia to get out of there immediately, saying that he couldn't guarantee her safety because he was going to use all his power from now on. Grizzlane replied that that was the way he liked it. It had been a long time since he had faced such a great opponent to entertain him. Meanwhile, Amelia was running through the corridors, furious, thinking about how Grizzlane was causing her so much humiliation. She wondered who had leaked this information to that brat, how he knew about the Merchant Guild. She remembered that the rumors said he had killed orcs, saved his brother from an assassination attempt, and even defeated Caney, but she never believed any of it. Now she thought it was all bullshit and wondered where her guards were. It was then that she was confronted with a scene that terrified her. All her guards were defeated, lying on the ground in front of a hooded figure. When she looked more closely, she saw that it was Belinda, who faced her and calmly said that it had been a while. Amelia, in shock, asked what the Perdium housekeeper was doing there, but Belinda ordered Amelia to stay very still because she had a knife pressed against her throat. Amelia was in shock and wondered how Belinda had managed to get so close without her noticing. Belinda then asked if she still wore that spider stuck in her mouth and said that she remembered a conversation between her lord and Count Rayfold, where it was said that Amelia's brothers used to make fun of her because of the spiders that hung around her. Belinda said she thought it might be a trauma or some kind of self-affirmation, but concluded that that spider definitely didn't suit Amelia. Belinda then stepped on the spider and asked if Amelia could collaborate from now on. Meanwhile, in the hall where the fight was continuing, Grizzlane noticed that the air was getting heavier, caused by the large amount of mana that Burnoff was releasing. Burnoff mocked Grizzlane's comment about entertaining himself in a fight and said that only mercenaries talked like that. He asked how Grizzlane dared to put himself on the same level as Amelia, but Grizzlane replied that he was also a nobleman and that this shouldn't be questioned by a mere escort knight like himself. The two stared at each other for a moment before going at each other again. Burnoff warned him not to sully the name of the nobility and then threw several swift blows in the direction of Grizzlane, who was forced to retreat and defend himself with difficulty. Grizzlane realized that the enemy was attacking like there was no tomorrow and decided that this had to stop. He blocked Burnoff's next attack, trying to disarm him, but of course Burnoff wouldn't allow that to happen so easily. He then changed his stance with the aim of breaking Grizzlane's guard and asked him if he had any last words. In the next instant, Grizzlane was hit and his blood spread throughout the room. However, Burnoff noticed something strange. Grizzlane had changed the trajectory of the sword with his shoulder, redirecting the attack and changing the pace of the fight. This caused Burnoff to be on his guard, unable to let his guard down. Even so, he found an opening and landed a powerful kick on Grizzlane, knocking him away. Burnoff then said that he would show the difference between someone who wields a sword out of pride and someone who is proud to be a swordsman. Grizzlane was thrown against the back wall of the hall, and as he got up, he thought that even though he was hurt, he was really enjoying himself. Burnoff had absurd speed, and his attacks came in succession with great range. Whenever Grizzlane tried a maneuver to turn the fight, Burnoff blocked everything. In sword fights, Burnoff made his weapons stick to Grizzlane's as if it couldn't be separated, and with his current mana, Grizzlane couldn't overcome his opponent's strength, at least not with the mana he was using at the time. It was then that Grizzlane began to feel a little bad about what he had to do. He realized that he had ignored something throughout the fight, the very mana cultivation technique he had mastered. Grizzlane then activated his third core and charged forward with impressive speed. Burnoff managed to block the blow, but he hadn't expected it to be so powerful. Grizzlane disarmed him with ease. Burnoff was in shock, trying to understand how Grizzlane had such explosive mana during combat. Just as Grizzlane was about to hit Burnoff's head, someone entered the room and shouted for them to stop. Belinda appeared, bringing Amelia with her. Amelia, frightened, said that he could take all the money he wanted, as long as he disappeared immediately. Grizzlane replied that she really was a spoiled brat, and that everything would have been simpler if he had given her the money from the start. He then removed the blade from Burnoff's head. Belinda commented that he had taken it too hard, but Grizzlane said that this was the treatment she deserved. He then looked at Amelia and said that he had very bad news, because now she would have to pay 20,000 gold. Later, in Rayfold County, everything was in ruins. Amelia, furious, broke a vase and screamed with rage. Burnoff knelt before her and asked for forgiveness, saying that Grizzlane was a much stronger opponent than the old rumors made him out to be. He explained that during the battle, in the blink of an eye, Grizzlane had used so much mana that he had managed to suppress all his experience as a swordsman. Amelia replied that then he had really changed. Burnoff asked if he should report this to Duke Delphine, but Amelia slapped him hard across the face and shouted, asking if he had any idea how scary Duke Delphine was. She said that if the Duke found out what happened there, everyone would be dead. She revealed that she had secretly allied herself with Delphine without her father's knowledge, and that the agreement between them was simple. The Duke would help the rebellion, and she would help destroy the Perdium territory. But if the events of that day were leaked, she would be the first to die. Amelia then concluded that if Grizzlane knew about the Merchant Guild's secret, he might also know about the deal with the Duke. That's why they had to do everything they could to kill him. Burnoff said he understood, and Amelia asked what the condition of Grizzlane's body was. He replied that he had left only minor wounds, but had caused a great deal of damage to his left shoulder, and that, in addition, had used up a huge amount of mana. Because of this, he would be incapacitated for a while. However, Burnoff warned that, in order not to leave any traces, they couldn't use knights from their own territory. Amelia said that she knew this, which is why they had trained those men specifically for this kind of mission. Burnoff asked if she intended to use the Wildcats. Amelia confirmed this and explained that the group was made up of war orphans, without relatives or any social status, but that among them were the best specialists, including even smugglers. She ordered them to send a dozen of them to the point marked on the map. Burnoff immediately understood the plan. That ravine indicated by Amelia on the map was the only path linking Rayfold's territory with Perdium, a perfect place to settle things quietly. Burnoff said he would take care of the preparations, and Amelia thought to herself that Grizzlane would pay dearly for the humiliation he had put her through. Meanwhile, traveling in his carriage, Grizzlane was bandaging his wounds and thinking that Amelia would certainly not give up so easily. Fergus, standing next to him, asked if he was all right, and Grizzlane replied that it was no big deal. The cut hadn't been deep, and considering the combat he'd faced, it hadn't been a bad exchange. He believed that the 20,000 gold obtained from Amelia would be more than enough to rebuild the Perdium territory, saving many years of savings. Grizzlane also reflected that perhaps it would have been better to have killed Amelia right there, but he knew that this would certainly have started a war, and he couldn't take that risk. Perdium's territory was already weakened and suffering from the barbarians' constant attacks, so it was best to keep everything quiet for the moment. All the information Grizzlane had would be enough to drive Amelia crazy, but this time, he intended to use it to his advantage and take full advantage of her. Belinda then gave him a serious look and told him that everything was going according to plan. The plan was to distract the guards and then take Amelia hostage, but she wanted to know why. Grizzlane nodded and said yes, but commented that Fergus had also done something important. At the same moment, Fergus felt a sharp pain and spat out blood. Grizzlane thought that was the price for having used the third core. At that moment, Belinda grabbed Grizzlane's hand and told him that the flow of mana in his body was in chaos. Then, without hesitation, she took a large needle and began to pierce his hand at various points, as if she were performing an acupuncture treatment. Grizzlane felt nauseous and then spat out a cloud of steam. He realized that the flow of mana that had been tangled up inside him had been unblocked. He thought that this kind of treatment couldn't be done by just anyone. It required a deep knowledge of the fundamentals of mana. He then confirmed what he had always suspected. Belinda was no ordinary maid. Even though she had come with her mother, he couldn't understand how someone so skilled had become the leader of the maids. Still, having someone like her by his side would be extremely useful, especially since the enemies they had faced so far were only the beginning. Belinda said that she trusted her young master completely, but asked why exactly he had taken money from Amelia. Grizzlane replied that it was because she was the only rich person he knew, which shocked everyone there. Belinda then asked if he had really broken off the marriage for money, warning that if Count Rayfold found out, it would be a big problem. But Grizzlane said that everything was under control since Amelia couldn't tell her own father. He asked if Belinda trusted him, and she confirmed that she did, but demanded that he tell her what he would do with the money. Grizzlane revealed that his plan was to pioneer the Beast Forest and set up his business there. Fergus was frightened, saying that the place was extremely dangerous. Since his great-grandfather's time, no one had been able to do anything there, but Grizzlane asked him if he remembered what he had asked before they entered the castle. Fergus got nervous, thought for a moment, and answered yes. He had looked for something in the place indicated by Grizzlane, and it really was there. Grizzlane said that as long as he was alive, there would be no problems. They would go there now. But Belinda disagreed, saying that they should go home first. They couldn't go around with Grizzlane wounded like that. Grizzlane asked her if she thought Amelia wouldn't take revenge. He knew that, the way she was, she would surely send someone to kill him by stealth. Belinda replied that she was good at fighting, just like old Fergus. And Grizzlane commented that she was very versatile, but he said he would use another method. He needed a vanguard and would go after her now. The carriage then stopped near an old house. Grizzlane got down and knocked on the door. Belinda observed the place and commented that it looked completely abandoned, but Fergus told her that it was the correct address. Soon, a shabby old man opened the door, asking who was there. Everyone was very shocked by the man's appearance, and Belinda asked if Grizzlane was sure that this was the right man. He seemed to be in no condition to fight, but Grizzlane firmly confirmed that it was him. The old man looked at him with disdain and asked if he was a nobleman, ordering him to leave immediately. But Grizzlane called the man by his real name, revealing his identity as the former captain of the Ratatosk mercenaries, the legendary Captain Jillian. This made the old man finally turn to face him. Grizzlane said it was a pleasure to meet you. Fergus, surprised, asked if he was talking about the Ratatosk mercenaries, and it was explained that this group was made up only of warriors who mastered almost every type of weapon. Although they no longer existed, their fame was so great that any knight, even outside the country, had heard of them. And the captain of that legendary group was precisely him, Jillian. Grizzlane claimed that he had come there especially to meet him. But just then, the old man picked up an axe and threw it at Grizzlane, who didn't even try to dodge it. And of course, everyone there was completely shocked by this. Jillian asked if Grizzlane really knew him. Everyone there reacted immediately and rushed to Grizzlane's defense, but Jillian just wanted to know what exactly he wanted with that. Belinda stood in front of Grizzlane and told him to stay behind her, because that man was clearly not in his normal state. But Grizzlane calmly said only one thing: eternal punishment. He said that he knew the cure for the incurable disease that Jillian's daughter was suffering from, and he asked if that didn't interest him. Grizzlane described the symptoms precisely: high fever, blood in the cough, red spots scattered across the skin, looking like flower petals. He said that the patient's eyes squinted in pain, as if he were under constant torture. It was precisely this suffering that gave the disease its name: eternal punishment. As he spoke, the child's desperate cries could be heard inside the house, and Jillian, clearly overcome with despair, could barely contain his emotions at seeing his daughter suffering like that. Grizzlane thought it wasn't too late. He remembered that, in the past, he had tried to recruit Jillian, but when he met him, he had already given up. His daughter had already died in that timeline. Looking at the condition of the house, Grizzlane concluded that all the possessions had been sold in failed attempts at treatment. Rachel, Jillian's daughter, was begging to die, such was her suffering. Grizzlane said he would start treatment immediately, but Belinda held him tightly and said that they had to go back. She said she didn't know what he was trying to do, but it was such a severe illness that not even high-level priests could cure it. Grizzlane then asked if Belinda really trusted him. At the question, she became a little nervous. Then he handed her a piece of paper and told her to buy all the herbs listed there. Belinda was shocked by the list. Grizzlane thought that for wandering mercenaries without a home, knowledge of survival was essential. Although eternal punishment was considered incurable at the time, he knew that a cure would be discovered in the future. It would become a much talked about subject, especially since the method was relatively simple. Luckily, Grizzlane remembered everything perfectly. The only real problem was the very high cost of the ingredients. One of them, the flower he held in his hands, was called Fairy Blessing. With all the ingredients gathered, Grizzlane finally chopped the herbs and the Fairy Blessing, put everything in a bottle and poured water over it. He mixed well and left it to rest for a while. At the end, he added the rest of the ingredients and prepared a small concentrated dose. He then handed the bottle to Jillian and told him to give it to his daughter. Jillian obeyed without hesitation and gave Rachel the mixture. She was still in a lot of pain, but suddenly the red spots began to disappear. Her skin cleared up again, and soon after, she fainted. But for the first time in a long time, Rachel no longer felt any pain. And of course, everyone was completely shocked to see that it had actually worked. Jillian, incredulous, asked if the medicine had really worked. Grizzlane answered naturally, saying that it was as he had expected. But Jillian, still in doubt, insisted and asked how this was possible, since not even the divine power of the priests had been able to cure his daughter. Grizzlane then explained that divine power was not omnipotent. It only increased the body's vitality and strengthened the person's regenerative capacity so that their body could fight off the disease on its own. This was different from a complete and direct cure. Jillian, trembling, fell to his knees and asked if his daughter was really cured. Grizzlane said that, with a few months of treatment using that medicine, Rachel would be completely cured. Jillian could hardly believe it. He then bowed to Grizzlane and asked what he would like in return. He said that he knew Grizzlane hadn't come there by chance, and admitted that, despite having an old and weak body, he was willing to give everything he had left. But Grizzlane replied that he didn't need a slave. What he wanted was Gillian, the true captain of the Ratatosk mercenaries. When Gillian looked into Grizzlane's eyes, he saw that they were the eyes of someone who dreamed big, someone who could go very far. So he pinned up his own hair, cut his long braid with the axe, and, the moment it fell to the ground, his aura changed completely. Now he was Gillian, the former captain of the mercenaries. Everyone was struck by the sudden change. Gillian stood up and asked if there was anyone else who knew about the place apart from Grizzlane. He said no. No one else knew about it. Then Gillian asked if there was anyone who had a grudge against him, and Grizzlane said yes, and that there would probably be many more in the future. Gillian grabbed his spear, threw it out of the house, and pulling on an attached rope, grabbed an assassin who was hiding in the forest by the neck. The man was wearing a mask, and Gillian lifted him by the collar, asking who had sent him. The assassin, one of the wildcats, wondered how Gillian had done it. But without answering, Gillian asked Grizzlane what he wanted done to him. Grizzlane said that he already knew who had sent him, and said that he didn't want to use his blade right now, but was beginning to consider it. Before he could take any action, Gillian stopped him, telling him to leave it to him. Then, with a single movement, he squeezed the assassin's neck until he killed him. Then he bowed silently to Grizzlane. Belinda watched everything, and thought that the man didn't hesitate for a second before killing. She wondered why Grizzlane would have recruited someone so dangerous. But then Gillian knelt down and declared his loyalty to his new master, Grizzlane Perdium, saying that from that moment on, he would put his life in his hands. Grizzlane replied that he was looking forward to working alongside him. Elsewhere, at a secret base, the guild members were shocked by the news that a wildcat unit specializing in reconnaissance had been wiped out. The atmosphere became tense, but the captain ordered everyone to keep their voices down. That man was Viego, the current leader of the wildcats. The subordinates apologized, but Viego said that, according to Mr. Burnoff's information, Grizzlane wouldn't be able to detect such a well-trained unit. He wondered if it had been his own team's fault. One of the wildcats then said that he had seen with his own eyes the man who had now joined Grizzlane. On hearing this, Viego immediately hung up on the informant and demanded to know if he was sure. The man confirmed with difficulty, and Viego remained silent for a moment, thinking that the legendary Gillian, former captain of the Ratatosk, had finally returned to active duty. Later, Gillian was driving Grizzlane's carriage. Inside, Belinda complained about the heat, saying it was stifling. She asked why Gillian needed to carry so many weapons, to the point where they had to rent 2 carriages because of it. Grizzlane explained that they needed another carriage anyway so that Rachel could travel in comfort. So in the end, it didn't make much difference. At the rear, it was Fergus and Ricardo who looked after Rachel. Grizzlane commented that Gillian would be essential for everything they planned next, and asked Belinda to hold out a little longer. The most important thing at the moment was to get through the rift alive. Belinda agreed, but said that the observer captured earlier had probably been sent by Amelia, since the mask he was wearing was from the Wildcats, a powerful guild known throughout Rayfold. On hearing this, Grizzlane thought to himself, with a cold, watchful eye, "Wildcats." Belinda explained that the Wildcats' main business was smuggling, but it didn't stop there. They were also involved in murder, drug trafficking, and human trafficking. However, even with all that, they still did much more. According to her, they were the most despicable scum, accepting any kind of dirty work. Among them were many extremely skilled ex-mercenaries. Grizzlane then asked her how she knew all this. Belinda became a little nervous and replied that she had only heard about it. Nevertheless, she warned him that they were persistent and that he should be careful. But Grizzlane just gave a reassuring smile and said that everything would be fine because now they had Gillian on their side. As the carriage moved along the track, an ambush began to form, just as Grizzlane had suspected. Gillian didn't seem surprised. Suddenly, an assassin emerged from the ground, charging straight towards him. Gillian, on seeing this, said that he now understood the trap they had set. He blocked 2 simultaneous attacks from different assassins, took their weapons, tore off one's arm, and split the other's head in half with his axe. But the ambush didn't end there. Several other assassins emerged from the forest, felling thick logs to block the carriage's path. Belinda warned that if they continued at this pace, they would all be crushed. Gillian, however, acted quickly and managed to stop the horses before they hit the obstacles. Grizzlane confirmed that he had expected an ambush at that point and realized that they had mobilized a considerable number of assassins for the trap. That's when a voice caught his attention. Viego, the captain of the Wildcats, appeared and began to taunt Gillian, calling him a coward for abandoning his group in the past because of his daughter. Gillian replied coldly that he didn't know what he was talking about. Viego angrily said that he had to live a life he never wanted to because of him, and that Gillian had aged so much that he didn't even recognize his old companions anymore. Gillian remained silent, and Viego, furious, asked him if he was playing the fool. and said he would make him remember by force. He then gave the order for the Wildcats to kill everyone there. Grizzlane asked if Gillian needed any help, but he firmly refused. He said that it was a matter between him and Viego, and that he would take care of it himself. As soon as all the assassins had advanced on him, Gillian turned his axe and began to cut his enemies in half. But even with so many deaths, they didn't back down. One by one, the enemies fell under the brutal, sharp blows of Gillian's axe, their limbs being torn off with each swing of the weapon. Viego, watching, thought that he was still as strong as ever, so he divided his units into two groups to surround Gillian on both sides. But Gillian, anticipating this, quickly got on his horse and wielded a large halberd. With speed, he advanced on his enemies, knocking down everything in his path with wide, devastating blows. The assassins shouted that it was impossible to get close, telling them to aim for the horse, but Gillian had already prepared everything. He had tied a rope to the end of his halberd and spun the weapon like a propeller, crushing all the enemies around him with devastating force. Belinda was already starting to feel disgusted by all the blood splattered everywhere, but the confrontation was far from over. When Viego came at Gillian with all his might, he pulled up his shield and managed to defend himself in time. Viego angrily shouted that Gillian had ruined his life, and at least he shouldn't get in the way of his work. He swore that he would make sure he killed him right there. Viego quickly left the shield line and, without hesitation, killed the horse Gillian was riding, forcing him down. But he didn't give him a second's respite. He was already on him with another attack. Gillian, although under pressure, managed to block the blow and counterattack by slamming his shield hard into Viego's back, who was taken by surprise and staggered backwards. Gillian, in a firm voice, declared that he was no longer the captain of any mercenary. Viego shouted at him to stop that nonsense and demanded to know who he was now. Gillian replied that he had abandoned the past and was now nothing more than Lord Grizzlane's subordinate. This made Viego explode with fury. He said he would kill Gillian at any cost, and then the two began a brutal exchange of blows. It was a straight fight. Viego was faster, but Gillian was much stronger. Viego shouted that he was a coward, that he had destroyed the Ratatosk for the sake of his own daughter, and that he himself had lived a miserable life because of it. But Gillian, with technique and experience, turned the fight around. He tried to hit Viego, who narrowly dodged. Even so, when he hit Gillian, he did almost no damage, although he did break his shield. Viego, furious, said that he had dedicated his entire life to the Ratatosk mercenaries, to make them the best in history, and that Gillian had thrown it all away to become a mere pawn of a nobleman. He said he would never forgive that. He threw several daggers at Gillian, who blocked them with his axe, but Viego still had more. He threw another dagger, which Gillian managed to deflect without leaving a gap. With a sarcastic smile, Viego thought that, as strong as Gillian was, that was a youthful vigor that had passed. While he was wasting his time with his daughter, Viego continued fighting and was now even more skilled. He took advantage of the daggers lying on the ground, picked them all up with his feet, and kicked them towards Gillian, who had no choice but to let them sink into his arm. Viego saw the perfect gap, moved closer, and tried to finish the blow. Gillian, however, dodged at the last moment. But Viego believed that this was the end, until Gillian, his hand bleeding, grabbed the blade of the dagger and asked if this was really the reason for Viego's revenge. Viego, confused, wondered how he had done it. But before he could react, Gillian swung his axe and struck Viego in the face, brutally knocking him into a distant tree. As he got closer, Gillian looked into his former companion's eyes and asked why he hadn't simply killed him before, if he wanted revenge so badly. He said he'd had several opportunities to do so. Viego, panting, replied that Gillian didn't know the whole story. He said that he had already been to his house, but that the man he found there was not the captain of the Ratatosk. All he saw was a weak old man who wasn't worth killing. So he asked where the real Gillian was, the man he admired most. Gillian, in silence, held his axe tightly and said that, like him, he was also a body bound to someone else's will. But at least for that last moment, he would show his former comrade the greatest respect he could offer, as captain of the Ratatosk. Viego, with a sideways smile, said that they were now speaking the same language. Then the two resumed their battle. It was exactly the confrontation that Viego had wanted from the start. The fight was frantic. The two were at the peak of their powers, exchanging blows at high speed. But at a crucial moment, Gillian saw an opening in Viego's movements, caught his arm with an agile twist, and drove his dagger precisely into his opponent's ribcage. Viego spat blood, but continued to fight with all his might until Gillian stepped forward, with his axe in hand, determined to end the fight. He said that he would always remember the commander of the 5th Ratatosk unit, Viego Villanos. Before he died, Viego still managed to smile. After so much bloodshed, Gillian picked up the blade and stood silently in front of the body of his former companion. Grizzlane observed the scene and said that he had done a great job, while Belinda commented that selling those soldiers' belongings would bring in good money. Gillian then apologized for taking longer than necessary, but Grizzlane assured him that everything was fine. Deep down, he thought that Gillian was much more exceptional than he had imagined. Grizzlane remembered when he first left home at the beginning of his journey as a mercenary. At that time, he heard stories about Gillian, and it was then that he built his foundation of inspiration to become the king of the mercenaries. Grizzlane asked if Gillian remembered that man, and he took back his blade, replying that yes, he was an old comrade. Gillian, hearing this, reflected on what it would be like to be an old comrade. Grizzlane, on the other hand, wondered silently where Gillian's old comrades were. Perhaps they were living their own lives, since the moment he had met them in the past was still a long way off. However, he was sure that one day he would recruit them all again. Grizzlane asked if everyone agreed to follow Belinda's recommendation and sell the belongings. Belinda confirmed this, and Gillian began to collect the objects, making it clear that he was not her subordinate. 2 days later, in Perdium territory, Belinda commented that they had finally arrived. Gillian, surprised, asked if that place was really Perdium, and when he confirmed it, he became pensive. He thought it was good to have a home to return to, remembering that when he first left home, he believed he could return whenever he wanted. But when he finally returned, there was no home. Gillian remained silent, thoughtful, and then Grizzlane asked him what he thought of the land. He got a bit nervous, tried to be polite, and replied that the place was great. However, Grizzlane went straight to the point and said that it was crap. He explained that all the houses were old, the renovations were a long way off, and the fields were abandoned. There was nothing planted because all the farmers had been drafted into the army, so the land was ready for cultivation, but without any crops. Gillian commented that he had heard that the Perdium were at war with the barbarians from the north, but seeing the situation up close, he realized that it was much worse than he had imagined. Even so, Grizzlane said that he would sort it all out, and that, to do so, he needed Gillian's strength. He thought it would be a long battle, a battle to eliminate everything connected to Duke Delphine and protect what was rightfully his. He was going to revive that land, no matter what he had to do. As the group approached the castle, Belinda spotted something alarming, and soon afterwards, Grizzlane recognized the silhouette of his own father. Later, at Perdium Castle, a heated meeting was taking place in one of the main rooms. Grizzlane, his father, and several important members of the house were present. The discussion revolved around what to do about the current situation, because as well as not receiving any funds, they were also running out of supplies to feed the soldiers they had recruited themselves. While everyone discussed political matters and military strategies, Grizzlane watched in silence and thought that it was always the same boring men. There was the captain of the Knights of Perdium, Randolph, the house treasurer, Albert, and the general administrator, Homer. He reflected that, although he had only been Perdium's young master for a few months, he had actually been the mercenary king for many decades. At that moment, Grizzlane welcomed his father, the great Count Zwalter Perdium, and thought that he had never liked him as a father, since he had always been so serious and strict. However, now he could see the weight his father carried, an immense burden that only increased with the years, the result of the responsibility of leading the land. Zwalder commented that he had heard that his son had been absent from the castle for a week, and Grizzlane explained that he had gone to visit Rayfolds. The Count thanked God that he hadn't brought any trouble, and Grizzlane, a little uncomfortable, replied that of course he hadn't, while taking a sip of tea in an attempt to disguise it. Albert then mentioned that he had won a fight against Cain, and had therefore won a lot of gold, and asked if he had gone out to gamble that money. Grizzlane replied that he hadn't, saying that he'd only gone to settle a few things with Amelia. Homer, however, commented that the young master always said that, but he had to remember that he was Perdium's successor, so he should think more carefully before acting. Grizzlane tried to close the subject by saying that he knew that and asked them not to worry. At this point, Zwalder interrupted everyone and revealed that, while he was away, he had heard that Grizzlane had executed Jamal and Philip, who were trying to sell Helena, and asked if this was true. Grizzlane thought those two bastards deserved it, but he didn't reply with the full truth. Randolph tried to defuse the situation by saying that he had probably just delivered the final blow. As Grizzlane knew that this weighed heavily on Randolph's conscience, he preferred not to reveal everything, and confirmed that it had been more or less like that. Randolph said that he had already suspected this, and then his father said that he had done a good job, saying that, at the end of the day, what mattered was that his sister was alive. Grizzlane was surprised, as it was the first time he had heard a compliment from his father. Seizing the moment, he asked if he could make a request. At once, everyone present began to murmur, imagining that he was going to ask for money, some luxury or courtesy. Randolph went on to say that he had gambled everything in the past, sold the soldiers provisions to gamble, set fire to the main gate, and melted down armor to forge a sword. Grizzlane thought that he had done a lot of stupid things in his life, but this time it was different. He didn't want a favor, just permission. He wanted to be the pioneer to enter the forest of the beasts. Everyone in the room stared at him in disbelief. Even so, Grizzlane kept a smile on his face. Even when his father rejected the idea immediately angry and exploded with rage, starting to shout at him. Belinda also reacted by saying that it was obvious that this was madness, since the place was overrun by dangerous monsters and there was nothing of value to be gained there. Grizzlane asked if Jillian already knew about the plan, and Jillian replied that he imagined that Grizzlane wanted to use the money he got from the Rayfolds' daughter to explore the forest, but explained that no one who entered it came back alive and that no one knew what was inside that territory. He also said that other counties were aware of this information. Grizzlane, for his part, admitted that it was true that there was nothing known to be gained there, but he still asked if they would go with him. As expected, Jillian decided to accompany him. Belinda, shocked, said that her father Dren hadn't allowed him to go, but he would still go. Grizzlane said he didn't need permission. He only asked out of politeness, as he was already determined to go with or without his father's consent. Belinda, confused and worried, asked what was driving Grizzlane to want to go there so eagerly, and Grizzlane says he'll explain later, because if what's there is scattered, he could have a lot of problems. But if he manages to explore the Forest of Beasts, he'll get a lot of funds, because not far from the entrance to that forest, there's a huge amount of runestone. This ore infused with mana is called runic stone. It's an extremely rare metal that wizards are crazy to get their hands on. It is used in all kinds of magical tools, such as barriers, circles, scrolls, alchemy, and magic. Everything that involves mana has a direct link to this stone. Grizzlane thinks that in his past life, it was Duke Delphine who discovered this place, but now he knows about it beforehand. Belinda gets very nervous, but eventually gives in, saying that he must have a good plan. Jillian says he'll follow his orders. Grizzlane then tells Belinda to go to the nearest guild to hire about 200 mercenaries. Belinda complains that he won't actually hold the money, and Jillian asks if he's sure about that, because mercenaries are hard to control. With such a large amount, it's going to be difficult to stop them taking it all for themselves. Grizzlane agrees and says that's why they're only going to choose the best, the most skilled group from that northern region. Jillian then asks if he's thinking of hiring those freaks, the Cerberus, who are known for rebelling against their own clients. Even though they are skilled, they are very dangerous. But Grizzlane confirms that he's going after them anyway. After a while, they walk to the border region of Zimbar territory where the Cerberus live. When the mercenaries see the visitors approaching, they comment that these lost souls have no idea where they are stepping. One of them comments that, from the looks of it, the leader must be a young master. At that moment, Jillian grabs the man by surprise. Everyone is shocked to see that he is holding him with one hand, as if he were a market bag. The mercenary asks what the bastard Jillian thinks he's doing, but he doesn't have time to react as Jillian throws him away with ease. This infuriates the others, who prepare to kill Jillian right then and there. But a man approaches, saying that even though he comes from a noble family, he can't act like that, and warns him that he might not make it home alive. Just then, he also sees Grizzlane approaching on his horse. Grizzlane tells everyone to shut up and calls for the captain. Everyone is silent, but one of the mercenaries, wearing a bandana, laughs and says that the young nobleman has lost his sense of danger. He says it's time he learned what it means to be responsible and throws a flail attached to a chain in Grizzlane's direction. The attack is intercepted by Jillian, who uses his blade to stop the chain, leaving everyone shocked. The mercenary wonders how he managed to do it, and the flail falls to the ground. Grizzlane then thinks that words won't work there and orders Jillian not to kill them, just to make them beg for death. Grizzlane then pulls the enemy's chain, dragging him along as if he were a sheet of paper, and slams his own flail into the man's stomach. The other mercenaries charge at Jillian, but he grabs the body of the first and throws him at the others with ease. Of course, some of the mercenaries don't even dare to approach, because just looking at Jillian makes them tremble with fear. Grizzlane gets off his horse and asks how long he'll have to wait before they call the captain. Then a man appears saying that he was sleeping very well and asks what is going on there. All the soldiers stand in a position of respect as he passes. He introduces himself as the captain of the Cerberus mercenaries. His name is Kayor, and asks why Grizzlane is there. Grizzlane replies ironically, saying that he hasn't come to play at fighting. He's there to make a request. Kayor observes his manner and asks what kind of customer he is. He says that, as a nobleman, he should be more polite. Grizzlane replies that that was his way of greeting, and that he thought it would be an easier way to tame the captain. Kayor gets angry at the word tame and says he can't imagine how much politeness he would have shown if Grizzlane hadn't shown up like that, but he still agrees to hear the request. Later, in front of a table during the meeting, Kayor asks what exactly the request is. Grizzlane then talks about the Forest of the Beasts. He wants to hire the Cerberus to act as pioneers in that unexplored territory. As soon as they hear this, everyone present panics. The Forest of Beasts is a feared place where no one dares to tread. Kaor then asks what kind of madman he thinks he is to want to mess with something like this. Grizzlane introduces himself as the young master of the Perdium territory, Grizzlane Perdium. The room falls silent for a moment, but then everyone starts laughing, asking if he's the same kid from the rumors. They say they already knew he was crazy. Kaor comments that he grew up in a cradle of gold, but that the forest has nothing to do with his little territory. It's not a place for newcomers. He says he doesn't want to hear anymore and ends the negotiation. Jillian is getting ready to fight again, but Grizzlane teases him and asks if he's afraid. He says that he's heard that the Cerberus were very skilled, but that so far he's only seen a farce, a bunch of fearmongers. Kaor puts his feet up on the table and replies that they shouldn't be mocked. They're mercenaries, not suicides. They only accept missions that are worthwhile. But Grizzlane responds by saying that losers always make excuses. Kaor remains silent for a moment, laughs briefly, and says that Grizzlane has broken the mood because he was even in the mood to play. But now he's thinking that that kid doesn't even deserve to die. He says he'll let him out alive, but for a good sum of money. Grizzlane then replies that this won't happen. He raises his hand and proposes something even more surprising, a recognition of Moriana. Everyone who hears this is completely shocked. Kaor asks if he knows what it means. Grizzlane replies confidently that of course he does. He thinks that Moriana's recognition is a traditional event, respected by all mercenaries. It takes place when two people agree to a duel with strict rules. Each uses only a dagger without imbuing mana, and both have their arms tied. A circle is drawn on the ground to define the limit of the fight. Whoever steps outside loses. This duel is practically a life or death sentence. Often, not only does the loser die, but the winner can also be seriously injured. Grizzlane explains that the loser must ask the winner for forgiveness and obey his orders, becoming a true watchdog. He then asks Kaor directly what he thinks of the proposal. Gillian watches in silence and wonders how Grizzlane knows about this tradition. He thinks that in the world of mercenaries, refusing this kind of duel means showing weakness. Kaor then begins to laugh loudly, with an evil laugh, and tells the others that they are facing a young master who seems to be in a hurry to die. All the mercenaries laugh excitedly and say they'll help out. Soon afterwards, Grizzlane and Kaor tie their hands and enter Moriana's reconnaissance circle together. The mercenaries cheer loudly for Kaor, while Jillian watches quietly, attentive to every move. Kaor comments that the boy must have just heard about it somewhere and decided to play along, but it's too late to turn back now. He approaches Grizzlane, tugs on his arm, and whispers that he has already won 5 Moriana duels. Grizzlane responds in surprise, asking if it was really 5, and then pulls Kaor back, saying coolly that he himself has taken part in more than 100 such duels. The duel begins immediately. The two go at each other with daggers in hand, aiming straight for the throat, but both manage to dodge the first attacks. They continue to move quickly, trying to land precise blows on each other. Kaor tries to pull Grizzlane tight, but even with his back turned, Grizzlane manages to counterattack. Grizzlane then turns and tries to hit Kaor, who also dodges in time. Kaor tries to apply a heavier blow with his shoulder, but Grizzlane manages to defend, even though the impact was strong. Kaor begins to admit that Grizzlane is lasting longer than he expected and recognizes that he does have some experience. But he doubts the number he said, saying that if he was going to lie, he should at least lie better. As the fight intensifies, the mercenaries continue to cheer, but Gillian gives them a stern look, making them all shut up on the spot. Gillian thinks this is a losing battle. The circle is too small for full maneuvers, and only one person can fit on the ground. The ban on the use of mana limits all movements, making them rely solely on brute force. In addition, the bound arms make attacks even more limited. He observes that the young master is barely able to dodge the attacks, while his opponent seems to have total control of the situation. Gillian thinks that if the situation worsens, he will intervene immediately. Kiar does look stronger, and he applies a maneuver to try to throw Grizzlane off balance, but the boy manages to escape and plant his feet on the ground to maintain stability. Just then, Grizzlane feels a sharp pain in his shin. He thinks it's the result of having blocked so many of Kaor's blows with his body. Since he can't use mana to strengthen his resistance, the damage accumulates more and more. Kaor notices that Grizzlane is turning pale and asks if he has reached his limit. As he continues to attack, Kaor thinks that this boy is being truly stubborn, putting up with all this on willpower alone. Of all the nobles he has faced, Grizzlane is the one who has resisted the longest. But even so, he can predict every move the boy will make. Grizzlane's strategy is clear: try to absorb the attacks with his own body while counterattacking in the openings. But since it's forbidden to use mana, the pain begins to take over every part of his body. You can see on Grizzlane's face that he realizes this too. But Kaor, far from being bothered, takes satisfaction from the pain. For him, that's what makes the duel so incredible. Kaor readies his dagger again, but not with the intention of killing Grizzlane, but to prolong his suffering. But in the next instant, Grizzlane dodges quickly and applies an unexpected maneuver. Kaor tries to hit him back with a knee straight to the face, but Grizzlane blocks it with his own shin, feeling intense pain as he does so. Still, he stands his ground, and Kaor says that's enough, stating that Grizzlane can now die. The audience cheers, and Gillian is ready to act if necessary. But, surprising everyone, Grizzlane gives a slight smile, dodges the dagger, and spins his body around, passing behind Kaor with speed and precision. In a single movement, he makes a clean cut across his opponent's chest, so fast that even Kaor doesn't realize where the attack came from. In fact, no one there saw clearly what had happened. Kaor, furious, tries to counterattack, but Grizzlane continues to dodge with agility and soon lands another blow to his chest. The audience is shocked by the second hit, and even Gillian, who usually shows no emotion, is speechless. Grizzlane doesn't stop there. He lunges forward, lands a powerful blow to Kaor's face, and then readies his dagger, not to kill, but to immobilize. He drives the blade hard into Kaor's forearm, who begins to attack only out of anger, without technique, and wonders what that brat has done to him, how someone who has been beaten up until now has turned the tables. Gillian watches and finally understands. Using too much brute force, stiffens the muscles and leaves the body heavy and vulnerable. Grizzlane, on the other hand, maintained his flexibility from the start, dodging and responding at the right moment. He wasn't just being weak at the start, he was preserving his body's mobility. Gillian then put his axe away and thought that he had never imagined that the young master was capable of something like this. The crowd shouts for Kaor to win soon, but Grizzlane comments that at least Kaor is honest. Many enemies would have already broken the rules and used mana. Kaor, even though he's bleeding, recognizes that Grizzlane talks as if he really had taken part in dozens of Moriana reconnaissances and confesses that he only got to the position of captain by winning duels like this. If he broke the rules, his pride would die with him. Grizzlane says he liked that about him. Even admitting that he is at a disadvantage in a direct fight, Kaor goes for it again. He remembers that the second rule of Moriana recognition states that the winner is the one who remains inside the circle. With that in mind, he tries to throw Grizzlane out. Kaor believes that, in the position they are in, Grizzlane has no way of escaping, and already considers himself victorious. Only, at the last moment, Grizzlane pulls out his own dagger with his bound hand and passes it right through his own skin, cutting himself but creating enough space to turn his body, kicking Kaor in the stomach. The two almost fall but are still held together by the rope that binds them. Even so, Grizzlane takes advantage of the opening and applies a counter maneuver that simply sinks Kaor's head into the ground. Kaor's head goes over the edge of the circle, sticking out. Everyone there realizes that the duel is over. Grizzlane looks at him and says he's won. Kaor, confused and unable to understand how he was defeated, asks who the hell he is, to know how to do so much. Grizzlane replies that he doesn't like his attitude, and that from now on, Kaor is talking to his master. He lifts Kaor, who asks what else Grizzlane wants, since the fight is over. Grizzlane says it's not over yet because Kaor's body hasn't completely left the circle. He says that now he's going to teach his new employee some manners. Then, without hesitation, he lands a violent punch on Kaor's face, knocking him completely out of the circle. Kaor, fallen, mutters that those are the rules, and acknowledges that he has lost. But Grizzlane doesn't stop. He keeps punching Kaor hard, blow after blow, asking if there are rules on the battlefield. When Kaor tries to answer, Grizzlane interrupts him, saying that he's not allowed to speak. Grizzlane continues to beat Kaor for a long time without stopping, and the mercenaries around him begin to wonder if it's okay to let it continue, since the bet is over. Kaor, exhausted and bleeding, starts screaming for it to stop, saying enough several times, and tries to get up to fight back. But Grizzlane, without moving an inch, replies that he hasn't completely left the circle yet, keeping up the pressure. Kaor, desperate, looks at his men and asks if they're going to stand still, ordering them to kill Grizzlane. The Cerberus men begin to advance, but at that moment Gillian steps forward, stomps his feet on the ground, and says that anyone who dares to interfere will die. Everyone stops immediately, overcome with fear. Kaor realizes he's completely cornered. He looks over and sees Grizzlane approaching again, ready to continue the beating. Without hesitation, Grizzlane lands another direct punch to his face. While he's being beaten, Kaor thinks about all the nobles he's known in his life. To him, they were all just dead weight, spoiled pigs with inflated egos, narcissistic traitors who only needed a little intimidation to get on their knees and hand over all their money. That's why he became the Mad Dog, someone who barked loudly and dominated with force. But now he was losing out to a noble brat who wasn't intimidated by anything. The Cerberus mercenaries begin to comment to each other that if they carry on like this, Kaor will die at this rate. Grizzlane, realizing this, decides that enough is enough and asks why everyone is standing around. He orders them to bring water, bandages, and a towel, warning them that if they don't, their captain will die right there. At that moment, the mercenaries awaken and respond immediately, rushing to get what he has ordered. Gillian, observing this, thinks that the Cerberus have already begun to obey Grizzlane. He reflects that, in the world of mercenaries, the fist is worth more than any law, and that what Grizzlane is doing is the most effective method possible. He's showing them who's boss. Later, with Kaor all bruised and bandaged, Grizzlane puts a parchment on the table and tells him to sign it. Kaor, still annoyed, glares, sighs, and throws his name on the paper saying, "Take that shit," but then changes his tune when Grizzlane questions what he said. He quickly corrects him, saying that it will be good to work with him. Grizzlane then grabs his arm firmly and says that from now on, they are a family, and that he hopes their work together will work out. A few days later, on the outskirts of Perdium territory, a large group of soldiers and mercenaries gathered, standing around and waiting for instructions. Some were commenting on why they had been called so soon, until a bald man replied that it was the young master of House Perdium who had hired them all at the same time. The staff comment among themselves that he's probably just an innocent kid, and everyone thinks it's going to be an easy job. But then, suddenly, Muscle appears. Gordon, also known as Gordon the Muscular, stands in front of everyone and asks for attention. He says that to put up with that brat, they need a representative to match. Some ask if he really is Muscular Gordon, and he proudly confirms it. He then comments that he overheard the noble lords talking and says that if they don't unite their voices, they won't get what they all want. The bald man asks what his plan is, and Gordon replies that he wants to test his new employer's limits. He intends to impress him, but also demands good compensation in return for all the effort he's going to make. He then asks what everyone thinks of it. The mercenaries don't hesitate. One by one, they put coins into Gordon's bag, saying that with him as their representative, everything will work out. Suddenly, someone warns them that the representative is coming. When they look, they realize it's Grizzlane himself on his horse. The mercenaries comment that he is alone and that this is going to be too easy. But Gordon asks everyone to put on a bad face and says it's time to show the brat what the real world is all about. But the next moment, he is paralyzed. Behind Grizzlane are Gillian and the Cerberus, all marching together. Fear spreads among the mercenaries at the sight of the famous Cerberus following their young master. No one understands what Grizzlane has done to make them follow him. As the group approaches in silence, Grizzlane glances around and asks if Gordon is the representative. Gordon, his head down, says yes. Grizzlane then asks his name. He introduces himself as Gordon the Muscular. Grizzlane comments that it's a nice name, gives him a friendly pat on the chest, and introduces himself as the young master of Perdium, Grizzlane Perdium. He asks Gordon to gather all the mercenaries, because it's time to start exploring the Beast Forest. Later, in the camp near the entrance to the forest, Grizzlane was making preparations. He thinks everything is ready. Temporary base built, resources set aside for searching, and troops organized. Everything is ready to go. He asks Belinda to do a final count. She confirms that there are 148 hired mercenaries and a further 44 mercenaries from the Cerberus, brought by the young master himself, making a total of 192 people. Grizzlane asks if she has already warned Scoven, and Belinda replies that she thought he would be against it, but that in fact he only asked to ensure that no one saw them enter the forest. As he is the area commander, he gave his approval without a problem. Grizzlane says that's great, and then gathers all the mercenaries together, drawing the attention of the crowd. He points to the forest in front of them and declares that this is the territory they are going to explore. He says that everyone must have heard the rumors about this place, an unknown place full of unimaginable dangers, monsters, hidden threats, and creatures beyond comprehension. Even with these risks, his goal is to take over the forest. He pauses and asks why on earth they would go in there. Some try to comment, but Belinda quickly tells everyone to shut up so as not to interrupt their speech. Grizzlane then says that anyone who wants to give up can leave at that moment, but for those who stay until the end and complete the mission, he promises to pay 3 times what was agreed in the contract. Belinda, shocked, asks in a low voice what he's doing, since they can't afford it. But Grizzlane replies that it's just to boost the team's morale. He assures her that he will get the money by selling the runic crystals found in the forest and asks her if she trusts him. She sighs and replies that she doesn't have much choice. Meanwhile, Kaor, still recovering, comments to Gillian that his master is completely crazy. Gillian just smiles and says that his master always has a hidden card up his sleeve. Grizzlane once again draws the team's attention and announces that the exploration of the Beast Forest is officially underway. Everyone gets ready, and the group begins to advance into the unexplored territory. They need to cut down the trees with tools and blades to create a path, as the forest is extremely dense, and until that moment, no one had ever gone so deep into it. After felling another tree, Grizzlane noticed that there was finally a little light in that dark place, so he ordered everyone to clear the path in that direction, cutting down more trees and putting the wood in the cart. Those who were off task had to dig and remove the roots to leave everything clean. Grizzlane thought about the information he had received from the future and knew that Delphine would make a great development in that forest. He also knew that the place was immense and that one day all the monsters would be driven out, allowing the forest's resources to be used freely. What he needed now was money, so he decided to ignore anything around him and focus only on the path that led to the runic stone vein, because the profits from this expedition would be more than enough to stop the conspiracy against him from happening. Kaor was surprised to see that even the boss was working, but some commented that he was just making a scene and would soon stop. Belinda was annoyed by these comments and told the lazy people to get to work, reminding Grizzlane of the effort they had made to hire so many people and complaining that they all seemed useless, as if it wasn't a serious job. Grizzlane replied that the more manpower there was, the faster everything would be finished, so it was no good standing around. Belinda replied that he talked as if he knew everything, and Grizzlane just thought that he had already tried to explain, but she didn't believe him. Kaor watched that woman so preoccupied with the chief and felt envious. While he and the others were carrying wood, the chief was there, surrounded by attention. It was then that Gillian hit him on the back with a log, and he angrily asked if he wanted to fight. Grizzlane, for his part, thought that everything was going well so far. In his past life, Duke Delphine, the one who conquered the entire kingdom and founded a new dynasty, became a great explorer of the region. Grizzlane never understood exactly why he had come to this forest, so in the past he decided to take his diary and study it. That's how he learned about nature, the beasts, and the whole ecosystem of the place, and that's why he brought so many lanterns for the expedition. Even so, Grizzlane began to worry about the lack of incidents, as everything was too quiet. Up to that point, he had only read the accounts in the diary, but had never witnessed the dangers described there, so he ordered no one to let their guard down, as they were heading deep into the forest of beasts. The mercenaries were still removing trees when they noticed that the atmosphere had suddenly darkened. One of them asked if it was getting dark, but another said that the place wasn't that dangerous, since no monsters had appeared so far. The group began to complain to Muscular Gordon, saying that paying for his presence didn't seem to do any good. Gordon, however, pretended not to be listening until he noticed something strange. He called the group together and commented that they had cut down several trees so far, but asked if anyone had noticed that the path they had come down was blocked. Everyone was in complete shock when they noticed this. Grizzlane quickly drew everyone's attention and asked them to get ready. The mercenaries began to tremble with fear as Grizzlane ordered Gordon to leave immediately, warning him that he would die if he stood still. Slowly, Gordon began to move away, walking slowly, one step at a time, but ended up bumping into a tree trunk. Then he ends up falling to the ground, and people start laughing, calling him an idiot, until Gordon realizes that something strange is happening, because that tree is emanating a strange energy. The group begins to feel that there is something very wrong there, but Grizzlane just watches in silence. One of the mercenaries, the bald one, insists that there's nothing there, saying that the boss is easily frightened, claiming that the dreaded beast forest wasn't even that dangerous. However, Cess warns them that if they don't leave now, they will all die. The bald man accuses Cess of just trying to deceive the group in order to cause fear, but at that very moment, he is grabbed by a vine that comes out of the tree and is pulled violently into it. The tree then opens its mouth and devours the mercenary in front of everyone. Grizzlane observes and thinks that no one has ever witnessed anything like this, so he doesn't know exactly how these creatures behave. But he does know that in this forest, there is a creature that kills when someone lets their guard down. He then recognizes the enemy and says that it is an entity. However, several other creatures appear and surround the group, causing the mercenaries to panic and shout that the monsters have finally appeared. Desperate, everyone runs to escape, but the beings don't allow this to happen easily. Each unsuspecting person is grabbed by vines and pulled straight into the mouths of the trees. The only one who manages to resist is Gordon, who holds on with all his might and shouts for help. Some mercenaries try to help him by cutting the vine that binds him, but the axe has no effect. Just when it looks like it's going to be devoured, Gordon pulls harder, but then Grizzlane appears with his mana-filled blade and cuts the vine with precision. Not only that, but he also hits the creature's eye, causing it intense pain. The people around wonder if he really managed to hurt that monster, and Grizzlane shouts angrily, telling those idiots to wake up to reality, because if they keep spreading out like that, they'll all become easy targets. He orders them to raise their shields and form a wall of defense, and everyone quickly obeys, creating a barrier with their shields to block the vines. At that moment, Grizzlane takes the lamps he has brought and orders them to be lit, saying that they will burn those beings. Kor asks if that's why he brought so many, but before he can hear the answer, a mercenary warns him that the creatures are approaching fast. Grizzlane then gives the order to attack with the lanterns. Everyone lights them, and with the flammable fuel, they hurl them at the beings. Yes, but the creatures simply break the lamps as if it were nothing. However, when the creatures attack the group, Jillian and Belinda come to their defense and protect the others. Belinda accurately hits the eye of one of the creatures, weakening it. Grizzlane then tells Jillian and Belinda to get ready to throw the lamps at the right moment. He readies his sword, saying that it will attract the creature's attention. Belinda, of course, is very worried about this, but Grizzlane sets off with confidence and begins to cut down all the vines that come his way with ease. The creatures try to attack him at the same time, but he dodges nimbly. Just then, one of the creatures raises its foot to crush Grizzlane, which makes the mercenaries wonder how a tree could have feet. Grizzlane, however, finds a loophole, and with one swift blow rips the creature's foot off, then drives his sword right through the creature's eye. The mercenaries then realized that Grizzlane was surrounded by even more creatures now. Belinda then warns them that it's time to throw the lanterns, and the mercenaries agree, saying that now it will work. When they throw the burning lanterns, the creatures immediately start to catch fire and scream in pain as their bodies are consumed by the flames. The fire spreads quickly through the forest, and KR comments excitedly that now they are winning. Grizzlane orders them to keep attacking, because these monsters need to burn to death. A great fire begins to take hold of the beast forest, and the soldiers watch in amazement, many of them not even knowing that it was possible to face creatures like this. Some worry that the whole forest will end up on fire at that rate, but Gordon reminds them that it makes sense, since their natural weakness would be fire. After all, they are trees. Even so, Grizzlane warns them not to let their guard down, because it's not over yet. He explains that the creatures will now reveal their true appearance. After the thick smoke begins to dissipate, the soldiers look ahead without understanding what they are seeing. Gillian and Belinda approach Grizzlane, and Belinda asks what is going on. Grizzlane then explains that the fire only burnt the outside of the beings, but couldn't destroy what was inside. The inside resisted, which is why all the smoke appeared. Soon afterwards, the real enemies revealed themselves, looking like giant worms hiding inside the trees. Grotesque creatures with open, flower-shaped mouths quickly advanced against the group. The mercenaries were shocked to realize that the creatures were still alive. Grizzlane raises his blade firmly and orders everyone to raise their weapons. He slams the sword into the ground and declares that, from that moment on, the battle will be hand-to-hand. Without hesitation, he advances against his enemies and says that everyone must kill without stopping. Even with Grizzlane bravely leading the way, it was obvious that the mercenaries were terrified at the thought of a direct fight against monsters like these. But the Cerberus group was different. They advanced with relish into battle, as if they were enjoying themselves. Their attitude surprised even the other soldiers, and when Belinda also jumped into the fray, Jillian wondered what they were waiting for. He replies that it was a direct order from Grizzlane himself, so they had to trust him. The mercenaries then exchange glances and, although still afraid, decide that there is no turning back. They shout and rush into combat, ready to fight. As everyone faces off against the tree-shaped monsters, Grizzlane leads the group firmly, guiding everyone on how to attack. He tells them that they don't need aura or mana to cut through the creature's skin, as their outer shells have already been burned away. Now they were just walking pieces of meat that could be killed easily. After some time of intense combat, all the monsters that moved were eliminated. Grizzlane thinks to himself that hesitation means death, and that his role is to eliminate that hesitation from the hearts of all those who fight alongside him. He cuts off the head of yet another monster, and thinks that, with him by their side, even the impossible will seem possible. When the battle is finally over, everyone is exhausted, both the mercenaries and the members of Cerberus. But Grizzlane warns that this is no time to relax. This is still just the entrance to the Forest of Beasts. Although many monsters have already appeared, they still have a long way to go. But there's no need to be afraid, because he'll always be on the front line. Grizzlane assures them that if they would trust him and follow him, no one there will fall. The group is moved by his words. With this renewed motivation, everyone continues to advance through the forest, clearing a path with their axes and felling trees along the way. But the further they go, the more monsters appear before them. Even in the midst of the battlefield, Belinda was still worried about Grizzlane. The mercenaries were coping, but some monsters were too difficult, and there were creatures they simply couldn't defeat. It was then that Kaor and Gillian advanced to the front line, taking on direct combat. Gillian used his shield to open up space, creating gaps so that Grizzlane could eliminate the monsters with precision. So far, no one had been seriously injured, and surprisingly, there were no deaths. Grizzlane warned that if they didn't want to die, no one should leave blind spots in the formation. Gil commented that their formation was now solid. Kaor said that the best training was real combat, and they all agreed. They continued to clear a path with their axes, felling trees as they advanced through the forest. In the middle of the group, one of the mercenaries was visibly terrified. He thought that everyone there was crazy, that they were trapped in a real hell. But soon, the group found a crystal-clear lake in the middle of the beast forest. They all ran to drink the water, enchanted by the purity of the lake, but Belinda warned them that it was dangerous, as she didn't even know where the water came from. Grizzlane thought that, despite the risks, they were doing very well up there. That lake was the most important part of the route to the runic stone mine. They then set up camp by the lake, rested, ate, and got ready for bed. One of the mercenaries commented that everyone there had already lost their minds. Although they were still close to the forest entrance, the road ahead was still long. Another mercenary said that, so far at least, nothing bad had happened. At this point, Gordon asked another mercenary if he was thinking of running away, and if he wanted help doing so. The group called him crazy, but the mercenary known as Dentino said that what he meant was that no one had to risk their lives for a few coins. Their lives were worth more than that. Gordon countered by saying that they had already come that far, and that the boss had assured them that their destination was not far from the entrance, so they were close. Dentino asked him if he really trusted this boss. That's when he started teasing him, saying that he didn't trust muscular, dumb bodies. He said that the boss was just the failed son of the Perdium family, trying to do something to prove his worth. Another mercenary commented that they had already been paid, and their only role there was to carry out orders. But Gordon defended Grizzlane, saying that not only had he led them well, he had also saved their lives countless times. Dentino retorted, saying that he admitted that the boss knew how to fight, but that they were only alive so far because of sheer luck. According to him, Grizzlane was only human, and one small mistake could kill them all. It was clear to him that the chief was going to use them as a meat shield, just like any nobleman would. These words began to upset some of the group. Dentino's plan was working, because everyone was beginning to feel afraid. He knew that, in that place full of monsters, continuing would be suicide, so he intended to run away and use the others as a distraction. However, another mercenary replied that, from what Dentino himself had said, they were alive because of the boss. And at that moment, Grizzlane was standing nearby, literally tending to the wounded, applying medicine and explaining that they needed to wash their wounds well so they wouldn't get infected. Belinda commented that the medicine was very expensive and wondered why he didn't use it on himself. Grizzlane replied that that kind of medicine was for people who were injured, not for him. He even organized a line of wounded people to pass the medicine around carefully. The mercenary with the eye patch noted that those potions and medicines were more expensive than all of them put together, so it was clear that Grizzlane didn't intend to use anyone as a shield. The group remained silent, reflecting on this, and many commented that Grizzlane really was different from other nobles. Dentino thought that dog had put an end to his plan. Now he had to try and persuade at least 5 people to run away with him. But before he could act, Grizzlane approached and ordered everyone to stop talking nonsense and go to sleep. He then called Gillian and Kaor together for a private meeting. Kaor muttered that if he were the boss, he would have cut out that mercenary's tongue by now. Grizzlane said that for the time being, it was best to leave everything as it was. He couldn't do anything about the monsters at the moment, but there was something more important he needed to confirm. The first task he set the group was to count how many lamps remained. In total, they found only 24. Grizzlane thought that, as he had expected, some of them had simply disappeared. He explained that monsters came after them every day and night in that forest, but that something strange had happened on the last 2 nights, as hardly any monsters had appeared. Gillian then commented that this probably meant that they had entered the territory of a night monster. Grizzlane confirmed that it was exactly that. He looked at the dark horizon and said that they were now entering the real beast forest. Meanwhile, the camp staff slept soundly, but suddenly, Gordon woke up to a lamp floating right in front of him. He was startled and wondered what was going on. Then, out of nowhere, he saw a creature trying to attack him from the side. He screamed in panic and woke up everyone around him. He grabbed his noodle and started spinning in the air, trying to hit the creature, but no one else seemed to see what he was seeing. He shouted that there was a monster sniffing at his throat, but the other mercenaries asked what he was saying, as there was nothing there. Gordon tried to insist, saying that the monsters had disappeared, but they were certainly around. The others said it must have just been a bad dream, and that next time he wouldn't have to shout so much. But the vice captain of the Cerberus spoke up, saying that Gordon wasn't crazy. He had also felt something strange and seen a lamp floating by itself. Other people in the camp also started to get up, reporting that they had woken up because they had seen the same thing. It was certain that something was watching them all. Grizzlane realized that the group was finally beginning to understand the real danger. He approached with Jillian and Kaor and said that everyone should gather together immediately. When everyone was awakened together, Grizzlane began to explain the situation. Gordon asked if there was a monster following them. The vice captain of the Cerberus replied that there was, but that no one could see it. Grizzlane confirmed this, saying that this was exactly the function of that type of monster. He explained that the monsters probably started following the group when they approached the lake. That creature was part of the beings that ruled the forest at night. It was called Palor, the hunting shadow. According to Grizzlane, these monsters were able to hide completely in the darkness, becoming invisible to ordinary eyes. In addition, physical attacks didn't work on them, as they seemed to be made of smoke. The antennae of these creatures tracked their prey and had the ability to extinguish all sources of light nearby. Their method was always the same: to lure the target into the darkness, where they had a total advantage. The group asked if there were hundreds of these creatures in the forest. Belinda then understood what was happening and said that this was why the lamps were disappearing. Kaor was already annoyed by those invisible monsters. He hated how they played with their prey before attacking. He stood up angrily and said that's how they should attack immediately, but Grizzlane calmly replied no. He said it was best to wait because the right time to act would be when the monsters decided to attack. Belinda protested, saying that more than half of the lamps had already disappeared and that waiting could be even more dangerous. Grizzlane explained that attacking first would only provoke a change in the enemy's strategy, as well as reinforcing their sadistic nature. According to him, if they acted now, the monsters would just hide for a while and reorganize themselves, which would miss the opportunity to eliminate them all at once. Jillian then asked if he was saying that it was possible to capture hundreds of invisible monsters at once. Grizzlane said yes, and asked Belinda if she had already prepared the magic scrolls. Belinda replied that she had, and that she had already distributed one to each mercenary. Grizzlane was satisfied with this and said that he would now explain exactly how they were going to fight. With the tip of his sword, Grizzlane drew a map on the sand and explained the situation. He said that Flores' group was concentrating on surrounding the camp. They were stealing the lamps and approaching little by little. The number of Flores was greater than the number of mercenaries, so it was impossible to cover all the points where they would attack. What's more, these monsters were practically invulnerable. Grizzlane said that if they went into direct combat, there would inevitably be a weak point in the camp's defenses, and it would be precisely there that the enemies would strike. Jillian then remarked that as they had set up camp near the lake, at least they were protected from behind and couldn't be completely surrounded. Grizzlane confirmed that this decision was deliberate. He said that, despite the disadvantage, it wasn't over yet, as they would take the initiative in the confrontation. He divided the plan into 3 groups. The first would be the Squires unit, which would be responsible for holding off the advance of the Flores. The second would be the Sniper unit, which would serve to slow down the monsters. And finally, the third unit would be the Elite Attack unit, which would be under their own direct command. The Squires and Snipers would position themselves in the center of the formation, blocking the monsters' advances, while the elite unit would move around the flanks to attack from behind. The aim was to completely surround the enemies and exterminate them in one fell swoop. Kaor asked if it would really work. He said that if the squires and marksmen resisted, it might be possible. Belinda asked everyone to calm down and reminded them that Grizzlane had just said that those monsters couldn't be hit with physical attacks, since they were fused with darkness. Then she asked how exactly he intended to finish them off. Everyone was silent, as if the answer was obvious. Kaor replied that it was just a matter of using mana, and Grizzlane confirmed this by saying that the magic scrolls had already solved this problem. Later, they began to organize themselves into battle formation. The Flores were already beginning their attack. Grizzlane then remembered a newspaper article he had read in his past life, in which it was described that after many deaths caused by these creatures, they had discovered that the Flores were extremely weak against light, and as soon as a strong source of light appeared, all those creatures showed their true forms. So at that moment, Grizzlane tore up his magic scroll and ordered everyone else to do the same at the same time. These scrolls contained a light spell that spread across the field and completely dazzled the Flores, who didn't like the feeling at all. They realized that, now exposed, their real forms were visible under the light, and began to advance with fury. The squires stood ready to protect the front line, while the snipers, finally able to see their targets, fired their arrows with precision. For the Flores, under that light, were no longer invulnerable. Grizzlane then raised his sword firmly, declaring that the enemy's true form had been revealed field and that it was time for the elite assault unit to move in. They were ready to carry out a massacre, and so they did, eliminating several Flores with ease. Grizzlane observed that, when illuminated, they became weak and exposed, and with that elite team, it would be easy to defeat them. Jillian drew the attention of his enemies, blocking their attacks with his shield. Kare, with his speed, took down enemy after enemy, and when he was surrounded, Belinda entered with her support, creating several strategic openings. These gaps were taken advantage of by Grizzlane, who continued to finish off his opponents with precision. That was the true strength of the elite strike team, and that's why they were called that. The magic light from the scrolls was still intense, illuminating the entire area, while the snipers continued to hit the floors with full force. Even so, without the direct presence of the attack team, the enemies were still advancing. But the squires held out for as long as it took for the main team to arrive. Grizzlane acknowledged their efforts and said that they had done a great job, which left everyone thrilled, as the boss had finally appeared on the battlefield. Now it was time for the final siege against those creatures. However, when the Flores realized that they were being surrounded, they started shouting at each other and then began to flee. Grizzlane wondered if this was really a retreat. They were clever and were trying to escape in order to reorganize. He then informed Belinda that the Flore with a horn on his head was the leader, and that it was he who was ordering the retreat. Kare asked if they should pursue. Grizzlane replied that the Flores had an obsession with their prey, and if they retreated now, they would surely return in a few days' time. And without the Scrolls of Light, they would have no chance of winning a second battle. They had to be finished off right there. If their leader was killed, they would lose their collective intelligence. Belinda, worried though she was, realized how much Grizzlane had changed. So she grabbed her hooked rope, imbued her body with mana, and used the harpoon's momentum to advance at high speed towards the enemy group. She could clearly see the horned Pelor and, without difficulty, tied the rope around its neck. That was the perfect opportunity for Grizzlane, who wasted no time. With a powerful thrust, he went through all the Flores in his path until he hit the chief, breaking him in half. The moment the leader fell dead, the enemy army was completely shocked and paralyzed. Grizzlane then gave the order to finish the job. Without their leader, the Flores were vulnerable and disorganized. The mercenaries, now motivated, fought with even more ferocity. When the sun finally rose, all their enemies were dead. Victory was theirs. And this time, because they were so united with their commander, they really celebrated. Belinda also asked if her master was injured, and Jillian replied that he had given his all in that fight. But Grizzlane said that everyone there had also made an effort. He then asked Belinda to count how many were still in the group, while he sent Kaor to fetch the mercenaries who had scattered. Jillian and Grizzlane began dragging the bodies of the Flores and scattering them around the camp. This was because the smell of these creatures would serve to drive away other monsters, since the Flores were at the top of the food chain in the Beast Forest. Jillian explained to Kaor that this meant that the bodies of the Flores would protect the camp. But Kaor, with his provocative manner, asked if he wanted to settle the matter with a fight, calling the other an asshole. Grizzlane, ignoring the silly quarrel between the two, thought that it had been 10 days since they had entered that forest. Now that the Flores were dead, the biggest dangers on the route he had set out had been eliminated. The next step was to reach the vein of runic stones, and perhaps that would mark the end of their journey. Belinda returned and reported that she had done the count. There were a total of 41 Cerberus, and the number of hired mercenaries had dropped by 3. The original total was 126 people. Grizzlane confirmed that there had been no casualties among the Cerberus, which made Kaor proud to say that this was obvious since he was the leader. Grizzlane then asked if the 3 missing mercenaries had really died. Belinda replied that it wasn't possible to confirm this, as their bodies hadn't been found. It was then that Gordon, hearing this, commented that it now made sense. 3 humans had disappeared, and no bodies had been found. He wondered if they hadn't run away, and the others agreed, saying that, of course they had, calling them cowards. Meanwhile, one of the runaways, known as Manus, had been running with 2 other mercenaries since the fight against the Flores had begun. They were desperately heading back towards the entrance to the Beast Forest. Manus said they had to get out of there while the monsters were still distracted. But at a certain point, the other 2 stopped, paralyzed with fear. Manus angrily asked if they were deaf and ordered them to keep running. He didn't realize that something was behind them. There were big eyes watching them. A huge creature was staring at them. And then they realized that running away at that moment had been a very bad choice. In the vein of the runestones was the gigantic snake that had killed the 3 of them. It was now spitting out their bodies in a large graveyard of bones that it had formed on the spot. Meanwhile, back at the camp, the mercenaries were at work felling trees to clear the way. Kaor commented that he was impressed because now everyone seemed to know exactly what to do, even without anyone giving orders. It was the first time he had seen mercenaries so well disciplined. Jillian, with his habit of teasing, said that this was different from a certain someone he knew. The only reason Kaor didn't punch his friend was because Grizzlane was right next to him. Kaor then asked if they would be dismissed after that expedition, as it would be a waste. Grizzlane said no. After that mission, he planned to hire them as soldiers. He thought it was common knowledge that mercenaries from weak organizations didn't often take part in large-scale battles. But those who were at his side now had already surpassed their previous level. They would certainly be of great help in expanding his troops. Until Gazelle, the deputy leader of the Cerberus, informed the captain that the Falori's bodies had been dumped in the right place. Kaor commented that the effect of the smell was really too good, as no monster had approached the camp since then. It seemed that nothing else would come their way for a long time. Grizzlane thought he hoped this was true, but soon Belinda appeared after spotting something and said that she had found something very, very important. Grizzlane ordered them to clear the path as quickly as possible, as their destination was just ahead. When they finally arrived, they saw an intense magical glow which impressed everyone. Grizzlane then explained that this was the expedition's final destination, the Great Vein of Runic Stones. Now they were in front of it. Kaor, still surprised, asked if there was anything so valuable in that inhospitable place. Gulam replied that Grizzlane never did anything without a reason. Belinda, excited, hugged Grizzlane and asked how he knew that. Everyone was amazed at the amount of unique stone in that place and began to imagine that if they could mine it all, they would be rich. But then a voice appeared saying that no one was to leave. It was the body of Manos, now dead, speaking with a sinister aura. The mercenaries began to wonder why he was there, but Grizzlane quickly realized that he was no longer alive. With a swipe of his sword, he cleared away the toxic mist, revealing dozens of carcasses scattered around the place. The mercenaries were shocked by the disgusting scene. There were not only the bodies of monsters, but also human corpses. Grizzlane said that, for the time being, they couldn't mine in peace. With that sight, there was a good chance that a high-ranking monster had made a nest in that place. Several bodies were too fresh to have been there for a long time, indicating that they had been dumped recently. He also realized that the toxic gas coming from the mixture of corpses was the reason they hadn't noticed anything from the start. In his thoughts, he concluded that none of this was recorded in the diary he had read in his past life. When he asked for everyone's attention, a monstrous creature appeared right in front of him and immediately tried to devour him. Grizzlane ordered everyone to disperse, leaving him alone to face the creature. He nimbly dodged the bite and managed to hit its head with his sword, but the blow only caused a superficial scratch. Kaor, seeing this, wondered what that snake had in its scales to make them so resistant. The snake, of course, kept attacking. At that moment, she launched a jet of poison towards Grizzlane, who managed to dodge, but ended up losing his cloak, which was melted by the acid. She then attacked with her tail, giving Grizzlane no time to breathe. The impact threw him to the ground, making him unable to react. Belinda was immediately worried, as were the other mercenaries, because the snake's gigantic body was destroying everything around it. The mercenaries tried to stay in formation so as not to be crushed, but they were panicking. Jillian, Belinda, and Kaor had to act quickly to save the group from being completely annihilated. The situation was in total chaos. Grizzlane, observing everything with his own eyes, no longer had any doubts. That gigantic creature was the true owner of the Vein of Runestones. It was the Blood Python, one of the monsters mapped out as impossible to hunt on that expedition. Grizzlane had only expected to find it deep in the forest, never there, in that crucial spot. The chances of beating that creature were almost nil. Retreating and waiting for another opportunity would be the wisest course of action. But he didn't want to waste any more time. If he gave up now, everything he had done so far would have been in vain. So he activated his mana core technique and mentally warned his little pet snake to be careful. In his mind, he remembered that he had made death retreat once before. Then he released his third mana core, the most powerful. And as expected, the python's attention turned completely to him, the strongest of them all. The creature's blows were extremely strong, and Grizzlane's sword barely did any damage. But when he focused his aura on the attack, using the power of the third core, he finally managed to draw blood from the python. Even so, she didn't back down. It immediately counterattacked with its monstrous tail. The python's attack was so powerful that, even blocking it, Grizzlane still felt pain. They quickly exchanged blows, each stronger than the other. As he fought, Grizzlane thought that no matter what happened, there were battles that could not be avoided. Now he understood the weight that fell on his father's shoulders, the responsibility to lead and protect. Many people were depending on him at the moment, and it was now that he had to play his true role. He finally managed to leave the creature a little wounded. The python could now only see out of one eye and was bleeding profusely, but Grizzlane was also badly injured and visibly tired. He knew that keeping the third mana core activated for too long would put his life at risk. If the mana ran out before he defeated the creature, he would be lost. But before he had to decide between continuing or retreating, his team arrived at his side, asking if he was hurt. Belinda said that they would hold the Piton while he recovered. But Grizzlane ordered everyone to leave immediately. Gordon didn't understand and asked what he had just said, and Jillian wondered why exactly. Grizzlane explained that, even with all his strength, he couldn't guarantee everyone's safety when facing a monster of that level, and he couldn't risk losing his men. He said that he had to defeat the creature right then and there. Belinda, worried, thought that just the fact that they had made it that far was a miracle, and didn't understand why he wanted to go on so much. But before she could reply, the python shot a jet of poison at them all. Grizzlane shouted for them to leave immediately, but they did the opposite. The formation of squires moved forward and blocked all the poison without hesitation. They were no longer afraid. They decided to fight for their commander. Because they had never known a leader like him. They had been alive until then, thanks to him. Kaor shouted that if they killed that wretched creature, they would all win. Belinda had no intention of leaving her master behind. Jillian advanced first to create an opening. They all believed in Grizzlane, just as he had always believed in his men. Faced with this, Grizzlane thought calmly about the situation. That snake was abnormally large. Its venom was highly lethal. Its red scales could only be pierced by swords imbued with mana, and any direct hit from it meant instant death. Belinda thought for a moment that they were trying to force her to abandon Grizzlane, but he explained that if they managed to knock her to the ground, he would have a real chance of hitting the creature's other eye. Then Grizzlane turned to everyone from the expedition in the Forest of Beasts and said firmly that they were going to kill the python right there and then, and they would all go home together. Upon hearing this, all the soldiers finally perked up and shouted in response, ready to fight. When the python opened its mouth to attack again, the elite attack squad went all out, creating the necessary opening. Kaor and Belinda, who were the fastest, managed to attract the creature's attention, distracting it. And then, at just the right moment, Jillian appeared with a powerful blow that created the large opening Grizzlane needed to attack the python's second eye directly, aiming with all his might. Grizzlane thought that even if he knew the future, nothing would go according to plan. But if he did nothing, it would be even worse, because many people would die. Even with several mercenaries attacking the snake, it still managed to shake off the blows with brute strength. Grizzlane knew he couldn't let that happen. He was the only one who knew the fate of that place. It was at that moment that the blood python managed to devour him completely, swallowing him up in a single movement. Everyone despaired at the sight, but only for a short time. Grizzlane's sword then pierced the creature's head from the inside out, completely severing it. The blood python was torn in half, falling lifeless. Grizzlane, wounded and panting, thought that he was the future of Perdium, and now they had finally conquered the vein of runic crystals. Sometime later in Perdium Castle, Albert was furious, saying that this was clearly an act of treason. He claimed that Grizzlane had not only ignored the Lord's orders, but had also decided to enter the most dangerous forest on the entire continent. Everyone knew, that the young Lord's behavior was impulsive, but this time he had crossed the line. Homer replied that there was no point in discussing it, since Grizzlane had been missing for a fortnight. He also said, Scoven was to blame, as he had falsified the report and had now been imprisoned for a few days. Some even said that he should lose his job because of what had happened. Meanwhile, Grizzlane's father, Count Zwalder, was silently reflecting on everything, until Randolph opened the door urgently, warning that an important message had arrived and everyone needed to follow it. It was about the young master Grizzlane, who had returned. He entered the room wearing ordinary clothes, walking calmly as if nothing had happened. When he passed through the door, everyone glared at him, and he just said that he had come back to see his father. Zwalder said that he was sure he had blocked Grizzlane's way to the Beast Forest. Grizzlane responded by apologizing, but said that it was necessary. Randolph asked if it had been worth disobeying orders. He said that entering the Beast Forest was an unforgivable crime. Although he had come back in one piece, he should think about what might have happened if the monsters had invaded the territory. Grizzlane calmly explained that he was alive in one piece and that no monster had come out of the forest. This irritated the nobles, as he not only retorted, but also brought valid arguments. Albert then asked what was so important there to justify his going. He admitted that there had been no incident, but said that something more serious could not be ignored. It was a letter sent directly from Count Rayfold to him. Albert said that he had a bad feeling about Grizzlane's visit to Rayfold's territory, and that he expected anything but the fact that he had extorted 20,000 coins from Amelia, who always donated money to Perdium. Albert explained that because of this, Count Rayfold was furious and had cut all ties of support with the territory of Perdium. In addition, the wedding was cancelled. It was something that was sure to have major consequences for Perdium. Grizzlane, reading the report signed directly by Count Count Rayfold, concluded that, even though he didn't like Amelia, that letter seemed legitimate. He thought that getting that money from her hadn't been difficult, but to see that afterwards, she had allied herself with his greatest enemy just to try to destroy him was shocking. For him, from that moment on, Amelia became a completely useless person. Any secret business or mercantile connection with her would be put to one side forever. If Grizzlane had taken just one more day to enter the Forest of Beasts, he would still be trapped in that castle right now. Time was definitely not on his side. As everyone stared at him, Albert asked if he had anything to say. Homer said that before anything else, he had to return the $20,000 immediately. Randolph commented that that money was precisely what was paying for the Order of Knights' expenses. But Grizzlane said he had already spent it all. He explained that he had used every coin on the expedition to the Forest of Beasts. Everyone was shocked to hear this, and Randolph was the first to lose control, advancing on Grizzlane and grabbing him by the collar, shouting that the successor to the throne was destroying his own territory with his decisions. Homer stood up and declared that Grizzlane had completely lost his role in society. Now he was just a criminal, and they should throw him in prison immediately. But Grizzlane asked everyone to calm down. He said that he would personally pay off the debt and return the $20,000. Zwalter, his father, asked how he intended to do this. Then Grizzlane called Belinda and explained that if the aim had only been to explore the forest, he wouldn't have used so much money. He revealed that he had a greater purpose. Then he showed a small chest full of high-level runestones. Everyone in the room was impressed. Randolph noted that the small box alone was worth $20,000. Grizzlane explained that he had mined all those stones in the Forest of Beasts. Albert, still in shock, commented that if those stones were really unique, they would be worth a fortune. However, he wondered if that would be enough to pay off the state's entire debt. Grizzlane replied that that box wouldn't be enough. But the rest, yes. So everyone was taken outside the mansion. There were all the mercenaries, dozens of crates of runestones, and the gigantic body of the blood python. The scene stunned everyone. The mercenaries, extremely disciplined, were working away, carrying the stones from one place to another. Homer, astonished, asked if Grizzlane had achieved all that in just a fortnight. Randolph, incredulous, said that he could only be hallucinating. Zwalder turned to Belinda and asked if all this had really been achieved in a single expedition. Belinda said yes, everything was possible thanks to the young master, who personally led the group and found the vein of runestones. They also obtained many rare materials, including the complete body of the blood python, a high-level monster. The runestones were only part of what they had collected. Grizzlane explained that the reason he had used the $20,000 was exactly that, to help his own territory. And, of course, it would all be handed over to the state. Albert turned to the Lord and declared that based on the initial estimate, they could pay off all the territory's debts, and there would still be a considerable amount left over. Immediately, everyone approached Grizzlane, now feigning respect, praising him and saying that he had been incredible, that he must be exhausted after everything. But Grizzlane, maintaining his firm stance, said that in order to really help the state, he had two conditions. Firstly, that Scovin and Ricardo were released, since they had only obeyed his orders and had committed no crime. And secondly, that they continue to restrict access to the Forest of Beasts. If rumors spread, everyone would suffer the consequences. Homer said that this was not a common request to make, but Grizzlane said that he had one last condition. He would recruit and manage all the mercenary forces and Perdium's security himself, as he considered it a waste of time to leave this responsibility in the hands of others. Homer then asked if he wanted an army of his own. Randolph found this unacceptable, as no one knew for sure what he would do with so many men under his command. Albert, on the other hand, believed that the young master had made a mistake and wanted to understand the situation better. He asked if the plan was to lead a personal army without anyone's intervention. Grizzlane explained that they had misunderstood. He was only setting conditions to replace the support that had previously been provided by Rayfold County. If there was any kind of outside interference, financial damage would be inevitable. He then questioned whether the treasurer himself, Albert, wanted to take command of the troops, which clearly angered Albert. Angrily, he demanded that his brother take action immediately, as they were, according to him, bargaining for the future of the land. Meanwhile, the mercenaries approached their leader, who was Grizzlane. Gillian told them that he was negotiating at the moment, and also informed them that the shipment of runestones was almost complete, and all they needed was an order to start moving. KR commented that, as requested, the trees were already in storage, and asked what Grizzlane planned to do with the blood python. Grizzlane replied that the creature would soon be dismantled. The poison, blood, and flesh should be preserved and hidden until a new order was given. At that moment, Zwalder called Randolph over, and Randolph admitted that the individual presence of each mercenary was memorable, but he couldn't understand how the young master was exerting so much power over all of them. Even Zwalter was impressed by his own son's attitude and commented that the group looked like an elite unit, as being able to get savage mercenaries to follow orders was something worthy of recognition. Grizzlane, however, corrected the statement. He said that it wasn't exactly like that, and that no one should treat his mercenaries like that. If it hadn't been for them, the whole expedition would have failed. Zwalter then told everyone to come back with him. This time, he would let it go, but warned that if they disobeyed his orders again, they would have to prepare for the consequences. Grizzlane thanked his father, and Zwalter said that one day he would inherit the place, and with that, he would also inherit the spirit of the North Wolf. Grizzlane reflected on this title, which is given to the Count of Pertium, the northern guardian of the Kingdom of Luthania. His father was a lonely man with little military power and ruling a weakened state. Even so, he fought on and on. He dedicated his entire life to protecting that territory, even without his wife Helena by his side and with a young son who was Grizzlane himself. In the end, it all led to a miserable death that won't even be remembered. Kyor commented that they would finally have a moment to rest. Belinda asked if the young master would be returning, but Grizzlane said not yet. They needed to get everything ready to leave as soon as possible. Belinda insisted that he should get some rest, and even Gillian said that his body had already exceeded its limits. Belinda explained that it was a miracle that he had survived and was now standing there, and asked him if he knew how hard it was to detoxify his body from that poison. Grizzlane approached her and said that he was counting on her. Everyone was silent when they heard this. Then Grizzlane turned around and explained that the news about the acquisition of the runestones had spread very quickly. Naturally, this information would reach the ears of those who controlled everything behind the scenes. That's why they needed to prepare soon and reach a level of strength that would make anyone think twice before challenging them. However, at that moment, Grizzlane fainted and fell face down on the floor, completely unconscious. Meanwhile, in a dark place lit only by a small window, a man was sitting on his throne. He had received a message written on a small piece of papyrus. The contents said that part of the Forest of Beasts had been acquired, and that it was time to start a territorial war with the Degard family with the aim of destroying Pertium. After that, the duchy would take the lead. The man mentioned the destruction of Pertium, and everyone sitting with him at the round table confirmed that the place would finally fall. This meant that House Grizzlane wanted to put someone new in charge. The man on the throne asked how many of his people were still in Pertium, and was told that there were only 2 people and 1 knight left. So he ordered that 2 be sent immediately to Degard's territory. The fact that the heir to the Degard family had been found dead within Pertium's borders was enough justification to start a war. It was also announced that Victor would be in charge of the operation, which caused outrage among everyone. Many wondered what Victor meant, but the justification was that if Frank had carried out his mission correctly, Pertium would have been destroyed a long time ago. One of the men in the room told his lord that he believed Victor would be able to complete the mission, but wondered if it wasn't too soon to reveal this card up his sleeve, since they had been extremely careful so far. He suggested that it might be better for them to maintain the same stance for a while longer. However, the Duke sitting on the throne said that there was a clear reason for this decision. Everything was being done for the sake of the Beast Forest. He explained that all decisions made there followed the will of Duke Delphine, and ordered them not to question him any further, just to prepare for war. That man on the throne was Count Desmond, also known as Harold Desmond. Desmond then asked if anyone there had any real idea of the seriousness of the situation. Meanwhile, in Rayfold's territory, Amelia was completely beside herself. She complained furiously that that bastard had obtained the vein of runestones using her money. Even after sending the wildcats to eliminate him, he survived. She confessed that she'd had to get down on her knees in front of her own father to ask for his help in running Pertium, and now she felt like a fool for it all. Bernoff tried to calm her down, saying that she wasn't like that, but Amelia admitted that she needed to control herself better. She had let her emotions dominate her actions, but now it was no use. Bernoff said he was ready to obey any order she gave. Amelia replied that now that they had discovered the vein of runestones, Pertium would get out of the financial crisis. Bernoff commented that they were probably celebrating there. Amelia agreed, saying that she thought so too, but pointed out that the most important part was that they hadn't sold everything yet. According to the last report, the stones had been in storage for 2 days, which wasn't enough time to find buyers. Amelia said that they could exploit this advantage, as they would obviously try to sell. Bernoff asked if they should act before the sale took place, and Amelia said yes. She explained that there was a place in the north where these stones could be sold, the Tower of the North, ruled by the Archmage Delman, a 7th Circle mage, also known as the Tower of Advantage. Rune stones were essential for magical research, and the Towers of Magic considered them to be essential items, always guaranteeing maximum security in transporting them to their destinations. She therefore ordered a trap to be laid on the main route towards the tower. The target of the ambush would not be Grizzlane directly, but the mercenaries in charge of transporting the stones. The plan was to attack the formation, cause destruction and chaos, and in the middle of it all, steal the rune stones. Bernhoff, however, reminded them that there was still the Karmazim Tower and asked if they were sure that they should only focus on the path to the Tower of Advantage. Amelia said that if they had asked this question in the past, the answer might have been different. With the Karmazim Tower having lost much of its power, she was sure that the greedy Grizzlane would never choose that fate. He knew that the Tower of Advantage would pay much more, and this time, she vowed to take everything from the bastard. Meanwhile, back in Perdium's territory, Grizzlane still hadn't fully recovered. He remembered the moment he was swallowed by the blood python, a predatory creature that began to digest its prey while still inside the mouth, even before it reached the epiglottis. The poison released inside it began to dissolve the prey to facilitate digestion. However, the mana released by Grizzlane's third core reacted to the poison at the moment of contact, burning the substance before it could invade his body. However, the process created a toxic fume that almost killed him. Most victims would lose consciousness or die at this stage, but Grizzlane resisted because he knew that this expedition was crucial for Perdium's future. To survive the poison, he completely absorbed the substance with his cores and used mana rotation to neutralize it. The control he had over mana was so precise that it could only be achieved by someone who had gone beyond human limits. Basically, he used the poison itself as a catalyst. And after remembering all this, Grizzlane finally opened his eyes and woke up. Grizzlane thought he should be feeling much worse, but strangely enough, he was much better than he had imagined. He couldn't even remember the exact moment when he fell unconscious. Who was by his side when he woke up was Helena, who unexpectedly rushed over to hug him tightly. She said that he had been passed out for 2 days, left without telling anyone, spent more than a fortnight away, and collapsed as soon as he returned. She was extremely worried, but still welcomed her brother warmly. After the hug, she pushed him hard, throwing him away, and ran out to tell Belinda that he had woken up. Grizzlane wondered if it was true that he had been unconscious for 2 days after coming out of the blood piton. He had only received first aid from Belinda, and yet he had continued working straight afterwards. It was obvious that his body wouldn't last long in that condition. But considering everything he had done after facing that creature, his physical condition was surprisingly good. 2 days had been enough for him to recover completely. Even so, he noticed something strange. His recovery rate had increased a lot, and the total amount of mana in his body was also different. He thought that perhaps his mana core was undergoing an evolution. Probably, the python's energy had fused with him during the poisoning and recovery process. Grizzlane had never imagined that he could evolve so much just by absorbing poison. It wasn't something he had planned, but the results showed that the risk had been worth it. He still needed to do some tests to confirm it, but if he was right, he could become dozens of times stronger in a short time. For now, the priority was to sell the runestones. As 2 days had passed, it was certain that everyone already knew what had happened. He needed to gather his mercenaries, but was interrupted when he heard knocking at the door. He thought that if it was Belinda, she wouldn't need to knock, as she never did that. She was indeed there, but she wasn't the one knocking. Outside was his father, Zwaltera, who said that he had finally woken up. Grizzlane was surprised that his father was there. Zwalter was talking to Belinda, who explained what had happened. She said that Grizzlane had jumped in front of the blood python, been poisoned, and narrowly missed death. She asked if he was really all right, and he said yes. His father seemed relieved by the answer, and Belinda commented that he had suddenly fainted, which made her very worried. Zwalter then caught his son's eye and asked if they could talk alone. He said he needed to ask him something. Later, the two of them walked together towards the Perdium training center, which made Grizzlane think that this combination, his father and the training camp, certainly wouldn't work. It was the first time in a long time that the two of them had been alone. In his past life, Grizzlane always avoided his father, fearing a scolding or lecture. Zwalder apologized for calling him so soon after he woke up, but Grizzlane replied that it was fine. After all, he had already slept for 2 whole days, which was already too much. Curious, he asked what his father wanted him to do. Zwalter then looked away, as if to make sure that no one was listening in. Grizzlane remembered the words his mother had said to him when he was very young. She explained that his father wasn't exactly an honest person. He always said that he had to be a steadfast pillar for the people, someone who was always ahead of the others, never revealing his true feelings. Only once had he confessed to her, and so even though he seemed too strict, his mother asked Grizzlane to try to understand him because he simply wasn't good at expressing himself. Soon after, Zwalter drew his sword and asked Grizzlane to do the same. They began training together, Apparently, Zwalder was taking it easy because the two seemed to be on equal footing, exchanging blows at high speed. After a while, they stopped to rest, and Grizzlane thought that his father's sword was really heavy. It was strong and robust enough to subdue the barbarians of the north, but at the same time gentle enough to protect what was important. That was the Perdium family's fighting style. During one of the sparring sessions, Grizzlane moved so fast that he surprised his father. Even so, the two continued to exchange blows with intensity until the fight ended in a draw. Zwalder commented that Grizzlane had improved a lot. Grizzlane thanked him, but his father said that he still needed to take some pressure off when crossing swords. Zwalder explained that although he had enough strength and reflexes to take down giant monsters, this also made it easier for his opponent to read his intentions. Grizzlane thought about it. Perhaps it was true. He had always found it easy to perceive his enemy's movements during a fight, but he had never stopped to observe his own patterns. Come to think of it, that wasn't the first time someone had taught him something for real. His fencing had always been based on pure practical experience, developed by instinct since his past life. Since Grizzlane had never received formal instructions, it was only natural that there were many details that he had never noticed. Now Zwalder was precisely teaching him these points. For a long time, Grizzlane had believed that he could only depend on himself, which had led him to suffer a lot on his own in his previous life. Now he was beginning to realize that receiving guidance wasn't a bad thing. In fact, it was necessary. Grizzlane thanked his father for teaching him that. Zwalder, however, said that his initial intention had been to reprimand him, because no matter what merits his son had achieved, he had still broken the rules. If everyone started disobeying the rules just because they were making a relevant contribution, it would end up creating much more chaos. Still, Zwalder recognized that Grizzlane had changed. Unlike many who caused trouble by trying to gain merit for themselves, he felt that his son was looking for something more. He said that he should continue along this path, thinking of Perdium, the people around him, and fulfilling his responsibilities as the true successor of that land. Grizzlane reflected on the weight of the word responsibility, and then remembered that his father had mentioned a request, but so far hadn't told him what it was. When he asked, Zwalder hesitated for a moment, even trembled, and asked if his son had any money to lend. Later, in the camp set up in the Forest of Beasts, the army of mercenaries was gathered waiting for their commander. Grizzlane arrived and asked if everyone was all right, and they all replied with respect and confidence. He commented that everyone looked even better than last time. Jillian asked if his body was in good condition, and Grizzlane confirmed that it was. He took the opportunity to apologize for having kept them waiting so long. He then asked how Rachel was, and Jillian replied that he never thought he would see her walking again, but that was thanks to Grizzlane. Jillian then bowed his head in gratitude. Grizzlane was happy with her recovery and gathered the three of them together, Belinda, Jillian, and Kaor, saying that he needed to tell them something important. He explained that Perdium was in danger at that moment. He told them about the attack they had suffered using Helena as bait, how they had tried to kill her and turn everything into a justification for declaring war. He also revealed that they had found the corpse of the Prince of Dagard, and that there were forces at work with the clear aim of destroying Perdium. Grizzlane explained that there were people watching their every move, and these people had probably been infiltrating the estate for a long time. They had neither the time nor the resources to prepare an ideal counterattack. Belinda, on hearing this, immediately understood why he was in such a hurry. She had thought that they could relax a bit after everything, but now she realized that the situation was more urgent than she had imagined. Kaor commented that after the forest, they would go straight to war, saying that the place never got boring. Jillian explained that Perdium was currently a perfect target, a poor and weak land that had just discovered a highly valuable vein of rune stones. Grizzlane confirmed that this was exactly the case, as no one would leave such a territory alone. Belinda complained that he should have told her earlier, because now they had to warn the Lord and the other allies. But Grizzlane said it wasn't time yet, since even the knights closest to Helena had betrayed her, which meant it was impossible to know who the spies were. It wasn't possible to tell friend from foe, so it was better to keep everything just between them. Grizzlane thought that, thanks to Helena's survival, the enemy's plan had been interrupted, and they had managed to buy a little time. However, now that the enemies knew about the existence of the runic stones, there was no reason for them to wait any longer. The battle would be inevitable and very difficult. Kaor replied that all he had to do was receive the order, because next to Grizzlane, everything was fun. Jillian said that everyone had already dedicated their lives to him and would follow him to the end. Even Belinda said it was true, because if it wasn't for her, who else would protect him? Grizzlane reflected that Perdium's greatest enemy was Duke Delphine, along with those who followed his orders, such as Count Desmond and Amelia. He decided that he would not allow everything to go their way, and announced that, from that moment on, they would all go to the Tower of the Red Flame. Kaor was excited, saying that they were finally going to sell the stones and make good money. But Belinda questioned why they had chosen the Red Flame Tower. The Karmazin Tower was closer and would pay better. Grizzlane explained that the choice was strategic, as the Red Flame Tower would cause less unnecessary friction. Gillian understood the point, saying that uninvited guests always appeared during the transportation of such valuable goods as unique stones, so it was wise to prepare for the enemy. Belinda added that it could even be an ambush, like last time. Grizzlane thought that since Diamuth from the Karmazin Tower had become a renowned Seventh Circle wizard, the Red Flame Tower had gone into decline. Since then, it was more profitable to sell runestones in the Karmazin Tower to the north. Even so, the Tower of the Red Flame was striving to regain its former glory, although it wasn't easy. But Grizzlane had a good reason to go there. Meanwhile, in the Tower of the Red Flame, a girl stood among piles and piles of books, wondering when that light would finally arrive. Later, Grizzlane was arriving with his transport, and Gordon commented that the tower was very high indeed. A man with an eye patch said that he had heard of it a long time ago, but had never seen it up close. Just looking at it, you could tell that life there was completely different from the reality of Perdium. The Tower of the Red Flame was where the magic scrolls were created, and the mercenaries were impressed to see the mages conjuring spells with such ease. It all seemed incredible, but the mages didn't look at them kindly. Without saying a word, the mages used concealment magic and disappeared in front of them, which left the mercenaries even more amazed. Grizzlane recognized the spell and commented that it was a magical concealment, and that it seemed the wizards weren't very happy to see them there. Kaor got angry and told them to stop acting like idiots, while Belinda commented that even if they weren't the best wizards in the kingdom, they shouldn't be underestimated. Gillian explained that Brabant was one of the richest territories in the kingdom. Grizzlane thought that, at first glance, this was true, but no one expected that the mighty Karmazin Tower of Magic would soon be in ruins. When they finally reached the tower, Kaor looked up and said that it was so high that if he lifted his head again, his neck would break. Belinda commented that the tower was so huge that it seemed to take forever to reach the gate, but she found it strange that there were no guards around, and noticed that weapons and armor were lying on the ground. Soon a wizard appeared and ordered everyone to stay back. The weapons and armor assembled themselves with magic, forming artificial guards, and announced that no one could enter without permission. They asked who the visitors were and why they were there. Belinda was surprised and asked if those armors were puppets. Kaor commented that the mages didn't even bother to show up in person, which was typical of them. Gillian then introduced Grizzlane as the Duke of Perdium territory and explained that they were there to negotiate. However, the wizard immediately refused the offer, saying that they wouldn't be buying anything. Belinda was indignant and said that they didn't even know what they had brought. The wizard replied that everything that came from the north, especially from Perdium, was of poor quality, calling them losers and telling them to get out of there. Belinda was furious and said that if he appeared in front of her, she would beat him up. Gillian asked his leader what they should do. Grizzlane then asked the wizard if they really weren't willing to negotiate, and said that if he were a real wizard, he would know what he was holding. He then showed him a very high-quality runestone, which left the wizard completely impressed. The wizard asked if they had brought all those runestones, and Grizzlane replied by asking if they were now willing to negotiate. Later, the mages in the tower were apologizing to them, and the first to introduce himself was Sylvain, the negotiations manager of the Magic Tower. Grizzlane explained that, as they had seen, they had a large quantity of stones, and that they needed someone capable of handling it. He therefore demanded to speak to the Tower Master immediately. Sylvain was visibly startled, but replied that it was all right. He would inform the Master, and asked Grizzlane to wait there. He also ordered one of the wizards to accompany them to the reception room. As they were being led away, they heard a loud sound, like a bang or something breaking. Grizzlane asked if something was wrong, but the wizard replied that the noise was common, as it was part of the tower's magical research. However, at that moment, a mage was thrown out of a room, as if she had been forcibly expelled. The person who threw her out had warned her before. He said that she shouldn't even dare step foot inside the research lab, as she wasn't even capable of using real magic and was just a burden on the lab. He asked if she really intended to ignore the words of Alfoy, the heir to the Tower of Magic and a master of the Third Circle. Other mages also began to criticize the girl, saying that they didn't know how she was still in the tower, and that she should consider herself lucky to have been accepted there. The girl, however, replied that she had the right to use the laboratory because she was a mage. Alfoy then asked her if she swore to that. He said fine, that he would call her a mage, but that she should be able to block a basic attack spell using her own defense magic. He then conjured up a fireball and told her to defend herself. He then threw the fireball directly at her. The girl, however, was unable to cast any magic to protect herself. It was at this moment that Grizzlane suddenly appeared, cutting the fireball in half before it hit the girl. Everyone in the tower was extremely shocked by what they had just seen, and Grizzlane wondered if this was really the kind of thing they called magical research, asking if that was what the Karmazian Tower was for. Meanwhile, in the tower's conference room, Hubera, one of the masters of the Karmazin Tower, asked if they were really out of unique stones and how they had let the situation get to that point. Rupert, another master present, commented that if it continued like this, the difference between them and the Advantage Tower would be immense. He ordered them to start stockpiling unique stones immediately and wanted to know what the elders were doing so far. The elders, visibly frustrated, thought that every time they tried to save a reserve of stones, someone said it wasn't necessary. Rupert always spent his resources buying useless items, such as jewelry and necklaces, and no one could stand his irresponsible attitude any longer. One of the elders tried to explain that the problem with the runestones was more complicated than it seemed. He reminded them that the master of the Tower of Advantage was a seventh circle wizard. While their master was still in the sixth, Rupert was annoyed by the comparison and told them not to mention that bastard, saying that if he had more unique stones, he would have reached the seventh circle too. But the old man insisted, saying that if they continued without stones, even the tower train wouldn't work. So he asked Rupert what he planned to do. Rupert, not knowing how Dumeth from the Karmazin Tower had managed to reach the seventh circle, suspected that he was buying up all the unique stones available. Just then, Sylvain suddenly opened the door to the room, saying that there was an emergency. Despite being scolded for barging in like that, Sylvain insisted that the master had to accompany him immediately, as a huge quantity of runestones had arrived for sale. Meanwhile, outside, Alfoy was still trying to challenge Grizzlane, but all his attacks were blocked with ease. When he launched a large fireball, Grizzlane simply cut it in half with his sword, leaving everyone around completely shocked by his skill. Alfoy, humiliated, shouted and asked how he dared to cut her spell. But before he could do anything else, Belinda quickly tied him up with magic, treating him like a useless burden. She asked how he dared attack her young master, while Alfoy, confused and furious, asked who those people were. At that moment, Rupert appeared, ordering them to stop immediately and demanding to know what all the fuss was about. The young mage, who was still lying on the ground, looked at him and asked if he was the master of the tower. Grizzlane, who was also present, ordered Belinda to release the bound boy. Alfoy, completely defeated and humiliated, screamed and ran like a frightened child towards his father, saying that there was an intruder trying to hurt Vanessa. He said he was only trying to stop her being hit, but the truth was that it was she who had attacked first, just to protect herself. He tried to make it look like everything he did was out of concern for poor Vanessa's safety. Belinda, irritated by the scene, asked if he was going to cry like a little girl. Vanessa, still trembling, said she just wanted to be able to use the laboratory. But Grizzlane, observing the situation, was sure of what he was seeing. Just as he thought, he wasn't wrong. In front of him was the beginning of a real nightmare. Vanessa. Grizzlane thought that if she really was who he imagined, then the nightmare in human form had already begun. Rupert angrily accused Grizzlane of not only damaging the tower, but also of trying to hurt his disciple, and promised that he would burn him to ashes. Belinda, trying to understand the situation, asked what they should do now, as that wizard looked really powerful. But Grizzlane kept his cool and introduced himself formally, apologizing for any disrespect. He said that he was the young master of Perdium territory, Grizzlane Perdium, and that he had come here to trade in runestones. Rupert was confused by the statement and asked what he had said. Alfoy, surprised, repeated the phrase, saying, "Single stones?" Grizzlane then explained that there were workers outside the tower, and that they might be able to see for themselves. When they took everyone to see the wagons, they were completely shocked by the quantity. The elders of the tower couldn't believe it. There were about 10 wagons, all packed with runic stones. Inside, Rupert was ecstatic. He thought that this was a gift from heaven and that, with so many resources, they might be able to destroy the hated Scarlet Tower. But he didn't say it out loud. Even so, Rupert kept a cool demeanor and said that the quality of the stones didn't seem to be that good. Kaor got angry and asked how he could dare to look down on unique stones like that. Vanessa, observing everything from afar, commented that the quantity was impressive. As far as she knew, a single wagon like that could last for weeks. Rupert told her to shut up, saying that she didn't know what she was talking about. He said that the bastard had left her behind precisely because she was a burden, and that she should learn to know her place. Grizzlane, for his part, watched in silence. Rupert then asked the elders if they wanted to analyze the stones. At the same time, he winked at them discreetly. The elders approached and, after a cursory glance, stated that the quality was poor. They said that the stones must have been collected in some unknown territory and that most of them were probably fakes. Belinda, indignant, asked how they could say that, since Grizzlane had gone to great lengths to gather it all together. Even so, the elders insisted that they were fake. One dwarf among them said that it didn't matter how great the effort had been because that didn't change the quality of the product. And he said that he didn't know there were deceivers as young as Grizzlane. The other boy commented that this was still not enough to trust completely. Then Grizzlane replied that he wouldn't buy anything else in that case and said that it was fine, they would leave. The group decided to head for the Tower of Advantage, and Rupert had already discreetly signaled something to the elders. However, one of the elders, trying to keep the group close, suggested that since they had come so far, they should consider buying something, as those women had made a long journey and had made no profit from the stones. He commented that they could at least help in some way. Rupert quickly agreed, looking generous and saying that because he was so benevolent, he would buy all the unique stones they had brought, but the price he offered was below market value. Grizzlane realized this and said that there had been a misunderstanding, so he asked Kaor to leave just one wagon with the stones and keep the rest. They agreed to sell only part of it and were surprised by the decision. Kaor, who had forgotten about this agreement, immediately ordered the mercenaries to remove all the wagons from the site. Rupert, confused, asked what he was doing. Grizzlane apologized again, saying that there had been a misunderstanding about the quantity they would sell. He explained that the real plan was to sell everything, only to the Tower of Advantage, and that they had stopped there just to raise some money before reaching their destination. Rupert questioned the reason for this choice and said that he had only been joking before, just to break the ice. He said that they could still negotiate. Grizzlane replied that of course they could talk about it. He then entered the meeting with the elders and the local chief. Rupert commented that the elders of the Tower of Crimson Fire were all wizards of the Fifth Circle, which indicated a high level. Grizzlane replied that this was great and exactly what was expected of the second strongest tower in the north, but Rupert corrected him by saying that they had heard the wrong rumors because the Crimson Fire Tower was, in fact, the strongest in the north. Grizzlane, unflustered, replied that it wasn't that important at the moment. Belinda, watching, wondered if the young master was provoking the elders on purpose, but Jillian replied that he clearly knew what he was doing. Rupert, trying to keep his focus, said enough was enough and immediately asked how much Grizzlane wanted for the stones. He warned that if they were to sell them elsewhere, they would receive a much lower price. Grizzlane confidently replied that he wanted twice the market price. The elders were outraged and said that he clearly didn't understand how negotiations work. Rupert said that it wasn't the right way to negotiate and that someone had taught him all the wrong things. He also said that he couldn't just make up prices. But Grizzlane insisted that, in his view, the Crimson Fire Tower should pay double. The elders got angry and asked him if he thought that tower was a joke. Even so, Rupert only advised Grizzlane to be careful what he said from then on. Seeing a brat who knows nothing about life made Rupert very angry, but Grizzlane didn't give a damn what he said. Rupert tried to keep his composure and commented that he was young, so it was natural to have this kind of attitude. He said that he would let it pass just this once, because he was very generous. But Grizzlane simply stood up and made it clear that, frankly, it seemed Rupert wasn't interested. He even wanted to sell the rune stones there, but at the price they were offering, it wasn't worth it. So he decided that he would continue on to the Tower of Advantage. Rupert, surprised, asked him to wait and asked why he was in such a hurry. He said that he had never claimed not to be interested in negotiating. He had just gotten a bit carried away. Grizzlane, suspicious, asked if it was really true. Then Rupert, trying to keep control of the situation, said that he recognized his courage for having come there first, and that was why he would buy the stones for twice the market price, as he had asked. Grizzlane accepted the offer, but on one condition: he would only sell one wagon of stones for that amount. Rupert, confused, asked what that meant. Grizzlane explained that he would only sell all the stones for market value, but if the Tower of Crimson Fire paid twice as much, he would only sell one wagon. After all, if he sold everything to them at that price, the Tower of Advantage would have to buy it for 3 times as much. So there was no point in selling everything at once. Rupert, indignant, asked if he was joking about selling for 3 times the price, but Grizzlane turned and said he would leave. Rupert, sensing that he was going to lose his advantage, said that he would pay 3 times the price. Grizzlane replied with a slight smile, saying that now he was speaking his own language, as was to be expected from the most powerful tower in the north. Rupert left, saying that he would get the money right away. As he walked, he thought to himself that, even though he was a 6th circle wizard, he was having trouble negotiating with a boy, as if he were trying to take candy from a child. He didn't understand why this sort of thing happened to him. But Grizzlane wasn't finished. He asked Rupert to wait a little longer, because there was still another condition. On hearing this, Rupert almost collapsed. Then Grizzlane declared that the other requirement was that Vanessa should become his. Rupert, shocked, asked, "What do you mean, Vanessa?" And Grizzlane confirmed that yes, he was referring to the true mistress of the tower, and he wanted her to become his personal mage. At that moment, Grizzlane remembered a moment in his past life when he was roasting meat on his sword and complained that the meat was burning. But the memory was interrupted when one of the mercenaries approached the group and asked if Captain Grizzlane knew the story of Vanessa, the so-called Red Nightmare. Grizzlane, surprised, replied that he didn't know. The mercenary said that he had discovered some things while gathering information recently, and that the story was very interesting. He asked if he knew about the sorceress who set fire to northern Luthania. This woman, according to him, had reached the 7th magic circle. Grizzlane, surprised by what he heard, commented that 7th Circle and Red Nightmare were catchy names, but wanted to know what that had to do with anything. The mercenary explained that there were rumors that she had gone mad. Despite being a mage, she had learned mana cultivation, something rare and unusual. Grizzlane, curious, asked why she had ignored the magic circles and decided to learn mana cultivation. The mercenary said that she was completely crazy and that, in any case, she went around burning everything and killing, which made the lords desperate. Recently, an official request for her extermination had even been issued. Grizzlane, reflecting on this, commented that a mage who reached the 7th Circle through mana cultivation rather than traditional magic was certainly someone very tempting to have around. Grizzlane, still in the present, remembered that he had told Claude that they were going to invite Vanessa, but he thought to himself that the plan never came to fruition. At that time, Vanessa couldn't control her own magic, and when they found her, she was already dead. Yet, even without control, she had an impressive talent, capable of reaching the 7th magic circle. With a good guide and an experienced master, she could really shine. Now Grizzlane was determined to make it happen. This time, he would succeed in bringing her over to his side. Gillian asked if he was really talking about that girl from before. Kara commented that she didn't even look that strong. Belinda complained that, in situations like that, he should warn them in advance. One of the elders interrupted, saying that it was perfect. According to him, Vanessa was just a burden on the tower, and handing her over would be a good way to honor the memory of another former member. Rupert agreed, saying that, of course, Vanessa had always been an esteemed mage of the Crimson Flame, and Aisha had always served the tower with pleasure. But Grizzlane didn't stop there. He added that, in addition to her, he would also need combat mages of the 3rd Circle or higher to be sent to Perdium. He explained that the territory needed mages prepared for territorial battles. At that moment, everyone was shocked. One of the counselors repeated the demands. Triple the market price, send mages of the 3rd Circle or higher to Perdium, and also give Vanessa to Grizzlane as his personal mage. These were the 3 conditions for the runestones to be sold. Rupert was silent for a moment, clearly irritated. Then he unleashed a wave of power so strong that it made the ground shake and shattered the surrounding windows. Furious, he asked if Grizzlane thought he looked like an idiot. He complained that wizards belonging to magic towers couldn't get involved in territorial battles. He said that not only was he ignoring the basic laws of the realm, but he was also demanding important magicians to settle some quarrel, which was a real insult to the tower. And he said that if this continued, he would leave nothing but ashes behind. Seeing this, the guards and mages in the tower were already preparing to attack, but Grizzlane remained still, looking straight at Rupert without flinching. Calmly, Grizzlane said that he would regret it. He revealed that they had discovered a huge vein of runestones in Perdium's territory, dozens of times larger than the amount they had brought that day. The elders were shocked to hear this. Grizzlane explained that this information was already spreading across the north. He then asked Rupert if he understood what this meant. Rupert replied that a lot of people would want that vein. Grizzlane praised him, saying that he caught on quickly. He explained that he didn't want to start a war. He just needed the tower's help to strengthen Perdium's territory. If the tower helped them during this crisis, he promised to supply all the runestones from that vein exclusively to the Crimson Flame. And he said that, if that happened, it was only a matter of time before the Crimson Flame overtook the Tower of Advantage. Then he asked Rupert directly what he thought of it. After reflection, Rupert reached out and shook Grizzlane's hand, sealing the deal. Later, Rupert spoke to Alfoy and told him that they had signed a contract. He said that Alfoy would be sent to Perdium as the tower's representative. Alfoy was surprised and asked if it was really because of him. Rupert explained not to misunderstand. He was sending him because he recognized his talent. As chief officer, he had everything it took to have a bright future. Alfoy was even impressed by this. Rupert explained that the experience would be invaluable for his future, especially when he became master of the tower. He also asked him to keep a close eye on the local inhabitants, to ensure that no runic stones were smuggled elsewhere, and he left a final important warning. If a territory territorial battle broke out. Alfoy should not fight. At that point, he would have to retreat and flee immediately. Rupert told Alfoy to hold out for just 1 year. In just 12 months, the Crimson Flame would overtake the Tower of Advantage. Alfoy replied that he would carry out the order, but when he arrived in Perdium, he was not at all happy, even though he had been officially welcomed. On seeing the castle, some commented that it looked like a classic castle, unostentatious, but probably functional. Alfoy, however, could only think that it was practically a dump. He was only there because Rupert had insisted. He, the heir to the tower, had been sent to that deplorable state. He introduced himself as Alfoy, a third circle mage and heir to the tower. His task was to lead the wizards sent to Perdium. Grizzlane welcomed him seriously, saying that there was a lot to be done in that territory and warned everyone not to let their guard down and to work hard. But all Alfoy could think inside was that bumpkin thought he was just a servant. He swore that when he became master of the tower, he would finish him off. Grizzlane then asked where Vanessa was. Alfoy replied that she was probably carrying the suitcases. And indeed, Vanessa appeared at that moment barefoot, her feet almost bleeding, carrying the group's suitcases by herself. Even though she was exhausted, she still greeted her new lord respectfully. Grizzlane immediately ordered her to leave everything and follow him, but Vanessa hesitated, saying that she was still carrying everyone else's luggage. Alfoy commented that she was used to this kind of work, so she should leave it as it was. However, Grizzlane picked up one of the suitcases and threw it straight into Alfoy's face, causing everyone to gasp in shock. He declared that Vanessa was no longer part of the tower, and that she now answered only to him. He said that she shouldn't be treated like that at all. One of the wizards commented that he would let that rudeness pass just because he was a generous person, while Vanessa was surprised by Grizzlane's attitude towards her. But Alfoy, furious, said that Grizzlane was just a crazy bumpkin and that he couldn't accept being treated like that, even though he was a nobleman. That was too much, even coming from a leader. So he ordered the wizards to show the pride of the tower. At that moment, Grizzlane snapped his fingers, and his mercenaries quickly surrounded all the mages. The mages were outraged and called the mercenaries savages, saying that they couldn't accept weapons being pointed at mages. Alfoy shouted that they were wizards and deserved respect, but Grizzlane told everyone to shut up. He said that the contract was clear and should be respected. He had won the right to freely command those wizards for a whole year through a legitimate agreement with the Tower Master himself, in exchange for an exclusive supply of runestones. If the contract was broken because of Alfoy's attitudes, he asked which side the Tower Master would choose to be on, and he made it clear that Alfoy's work in Perdium was nothing more than a mana reserve. If he wanted to be treated with more respect, then he should start by treating others with more respect first. Alfoy, indignant, asked if Grizzlane was really calling him a simple mana reserve. He couldn't believe anyone would dare treat him like that. But Grizzlane ignored his complaint and ordered Kaor and Jillian to take care of their own. Kaor, with a wry smile, asked if life in the tower was good. Jillian added that they would all adapt very well to the new territory. Alfoy began to tremble, clearly terrified by the situation. Meanwhile, Vanessa just watched in silence. It was then that Grizzlane approached her and declared that, from that moment on, she would obey only him. She was now officially his personal magician. But Vanessa seemed discouraged and replied sadly that she couldn't be a personal magician, as she couldn't even use magic. Grizzlane, however, simply asked her to follow him, assuring her that he could make her use real magic. At the training center, Grizzlane called Vanessa to evaluate her progress. Whenever he did this, she got nervous, but he still asked her how much she had learned. Vanessa said she knew how to cast some fifth circle spells. Grizzlane was pleased and said that was great, but Vanessa insisted that it was useless because she simply couldn't use magic. Grizzlane asked if there was a specific reason for this. Vanessa explained that ever since she was little, she had never been able to feel anything. Even so, she continued to study hard, believing that one day she might be able to cast spells. However, the more she studied, the more she realized how incapable she was. Then her master passed away, and she began to think that perhaps that was the end of the road for her too. But when Grizzlane heard that, he understood that she had already reached the 5th magic circle. Compared to the old men in the tower, she was quite strong. He knew that magic wasn't just about memorizing formulas. To really use magic, you had to understand it as a whole and apply your own will and interpretation within it. And Vanessa understood this well, but her body simply couldn't keep up with what her mind already knew. Grizzlane knew from experience how difficult it was to fight against such a limitation, but he also knew that her efforts had not been in vain. All that was missing was a little push. At that moment, he remembered his former partner saying that Vanessa was from the 7th circle. That really was impressive. Then Grizzlane said that from that day on, he He himself would teach her mana cultivation techniques. Vanessa was surprised to hear this and asked why he would do this, since she was a mage. Grizzlane explained that the cultivation method, like the magic circles, was also based on the use of mana. It therefore made sense to try a new path. He then asked if she had tried this method before. Vanessa, frightened, replied that she had never tried it. She said it was crazy. Using mana through cultivation techniques could cause serious mental damage if something went wrong. But Grizzlane asked her to try. As Vanessa looked at him, she saw the determined look in his eyes and thought that perhaps she really could feel magic like that. So she prepared herself for the mana cultivation process, standing with her back to her master. Slowly, she unbuttoned her shirt so that he could access the mana points on her back. Looking at her, Grizzlane remembered his past life. At that time, her eyes were like his. They were full of regret, anger, and hatred, as if she were trapped at the bottom of an endless abyss. For trying to manipulate mana in a way that no one had ever dared, she had caused a disaster, setting everything around her on fire. And now, there they both were again. But this time, Grizzlane thought he would do it differently. He would help her. He wouldn't let her fall into that abyss again. Then Grizzlane used his technique on Vanessa's back, carefully opening the mana vessels that were dormant. The pain was intense. The heat, unbearable. But he ordered her to remain silent. She couldn't let the mana leak out. What was inside her body now was his mana, and she needed to hold on to that feeling tightly. She needed to feel the mana flowing throughout her body. Vanessa then began to notice. The mana was spreading through every part of her body, moving through every corner, going straight to her core. It was as if, for the first time, she was really alive inside. Until finally, the process was complete. At that moment, Vanessa had a glimpse of the past. She remembered when she was a child and had watched a conversation between Rupert and his master. The master said that Vanessa had talent. He said that if it hadn't been for that child, how would they have been able to prove the theory of mana irregularity? Rupert, for his part, admitted that this was true, but said that he still found it very strange. He said that all he had to do was look at her. It didn't matter how intelligent she was. If she couldn't use magic, how could she be considered a mage? The master, called Renato, just said that it didn't make sense. He believed her. Vanessa, still a little girl, felt very bad. She kept apologizing to her master. She said that if she were a little more talented, he wouldn't have to leave. But Renato replied that he wasn't leaving because of that. He was going on a journey in search of a way for her to use magic. And before he left, he told her to raise her head and look at the sky. He said that there was no place in the world where darkness would remain forever. He promised that one day the light would reach her. And now, in the present, Vanessa understood. That light that her eyes had arrived was Grizzlane Perdium, and she thought with a full heart that her master was right. Then she fainted, but thought she had finally reached the light. Meanwhile, in a small bar, there was a general brawl going on. The people there were fighting each other, and there was one big guy who was knocking everyone out single-handedly. After knocking out another guy, he picked him up and threw him out of the bar. He commented that he had barely hit them, and they were all falling. Meanwhile, the head of the group was just drinking at the bar and later went for a rest by the river, until a messenger appeared and informed them that he had received a direct order from Count Desmond. This messenger was Victor, who immediately put on his helmet and told them they could be on their way. He was starting to get bored. Meanwhile, in the Zwalder's office, the atmosphere was extremely somber. A letter had just arrived from the county of Degard, informing them that the Count's son had been killed by Grizzlane, and they were going to declare revenge. Zwalder himself ordered all the soldiers to assemble immediately, as this was clearly a declaration of war. Later, during the meeting, Randolph commented that they could only be going mad, since there was no proof that Grizzlane had done it. Surely they were just looking for a pretext to start a conflict. For him, it was a lie. Zwalter was extremely stressed until Grizzlane commented that this must have something to do with the runestone. He explained that he had mentioned that 2 men from Perdium's territory had gone to Gilgard and had probably set up this lie, meaning that they had been betrayed. Zwalder reflected on this, thinking that the runic stones could indeed be a plausible reason for a crisis, even if the act had not been deliberate. Apparently, Grizzlane was already prepared for this kind of consequence, and Randolph said that there was nothing more to discuss. Compared to Gilgard, their forces had much more experience and combat power, so they should make them pay for it. It was then that Scovon appeared with an emergency message. The enemy army was already inside the territory. Degard's army was spotted, fully armed and ready for war. Everyone was shocked by the speed of the movement. Albert commented that the letter had just arrived and they were already there, which confirmed that everything had been planned and armed in advance. According to the analysis, they had 6,000 armed troops and a further 1,000 support troops, and were already positioning their siege weapons. Given this information, they asked Randolph what they would do now, since the difference in power was absurd. Randolph said that this was exactly why he had warned them not to reduce the troops, but Zwalter asked everyone to calm down, because if they continued arguing in there, they would only get even more wound up. He ordered that all the troops be assembled at the gate and that the civilians be evacuated into the city, while the soldiers should remain in position, because the war was about about to begin. Meanwhile, on the other side, the enemy leader just kept singing. He said that his son was useless, but thanks to him, they now had a perfect excuse to attack Perdium. This was Tamis de Garde, and he commented that at least his son had done something useful before he died. He was standing next to Victor, and Thomas asked Victor to accompany him, as he wanted to have a talk with Zwalder. Zwalder asked what exactly Tamis was doing, and then Tamis declared that his beloved son Gilmore de Garde had died in those lands at the hands of Perdium's successor, Grizzlane Perdium, and asked who the father would be who would accept this without reacting. Tamis demanded that Zwalder surrender immediately, otherwise much blood would be shed. Outraged, Perdium's soldiers questioned how he dared to lie so blatantly and said it was pointless trying to talk to someone as irrational as him. Grizzlane had expected this kind of reaction since Gilmore's death, but he was relieved that he had at least managed to save Helena. He thought that, given the enemy's level of preparation, it was obvious that the whole thing had been a very well thought out plan from the start. They wanted this war. Zwalder said firmly that his son had not killed Gilmore, and that was the only thing he would say. If Tamis valued his own life, he'd better leave immediately. The aura that Zwalder emanated made Tamis and Victor feel the pressure of his power. Victor thought he could clearly see that this man was a true general. After all, he had been responsible for protecting the North for so many years. Thomas commented that this was indeed the legendary Wolf of the North, but he also said that because of him, a lot of blood would be spilled and that the entire territory of Perdium would regret it. Randolph offered to lead the troops and said that even if he was outnumbered, he could still win. But Homer wondered if he had gone mad, since the difference between the armies was absurd. Nevertheless, Randolph said it was better to fight than to stand still. Zwalder, listening to all this, was silent, lost in thought. For him, it was a real nightmare. Everything had happened so suddenly, and yet the enemies were fully prepared. The number of soldiers was enormous, and he really didn't know what to do. It was then that Grizzlane said that they would defend themselves. He explained that de Garde had around 7,000 soldiers, while Perdium only had 2,000, which made the difference very large. What's more, the enemy was already organized, and morale was high. Even so, Grizzlane calculated that they would have about 15 days until the full attack, and that, during that time, they would call for reinforcements and resist as much as possible. Zwalder agreed that this was the only thing they could do, but he didn't believe that anyone would really help them. At that moment, Grizzlane approached and whispered something in Zwalder's ear. Zwalder was quite shocked by what Grizzlane said in his ear. Later, Grizzlane thought that it was another fortnight before the real battle began and that he was going to do everything in his power to turn the tide. He was already wearing armor very similar to the one he wore in his past life, as if he were fully assuming the identity of an experienced warrior. During the meeting with her closest allies, Belinda commented that the war was now official. Grizzlane firmly stated that, from that moment on, he would lead and give all the orders. Everyone was very surprised by the firmness and clarity of his instructions. Grizzlane explained that the first step would be to make a surprise attack on de Garde's support unit before they had time to react. If they were left without support and supplies, continuing the war would become much more difficult for the enemy. Belinda then asked how exactly they would do this, since the enemy troops had surrounded the front of the castle and would be able to see any movement. But Grizzlane drew the attention of Cor and Jillian. Kerr said that, as had been ordered, he had positioned his troops inside the forest of demonic beasts, and if anything happened, they could hide there safely. Jillian added that the cloaks made from the skins of the beings had already been distributed among the soldiers, and as they were very dark cloaks, this would allow them to move around at night without being detected. Grizzlane, however, warned that if a large group moved at once, they would still end up being noticed. But if it was a small elite unit wearing only these cloaks, the surprise attack would have a chance of success. The problem was that they still didn't know exactly where de Garde's support unit was located, so he ordered Belinda to go and find it. Although she was nervous, she obeyed immediately because she trusted her master. Grizzlane knew it was a dangerous mission, as it required her to infiltrate enemy territory unnoticed, but he also knew that, for someone like Belinda, it would be easy. The only thing missing now was the hidden card that could decide the fate of that war, and that card was Vanessa. A few days later, at the base of de Garde's support unit, Commander Fabro, Perdium's former vassal, was celebrating. He said that, after so many years of serving those good-for-nothings, he would finally be rewarded. He thought it was great to have changed sides and wished with all his might that Perdium would fall soon. Finally, that piece of land would be his. But that very night, Grizzlane's elite team was already in position, ready to attack. They were ready to destroy the support unit. Belinda watched and commented that they were already celebrating. Kara replied that the joy wouldn't last long. For Grizzlane, This was the perfect scenario for a surprise attack. He made it clear that they didn't need to take prisoners. The aim was to eliminate everyone. By then, Grizzlane was completely transformed into his true self, like the warrior he had been in his past life. So he and his men advanced with brutality, wiping out the guards one by one. This was war. There was no room for hesitation or mercy. The support unit was unprepared for this sudden attack. Grizzlane and Gillian led the onslaught and killed all the soldiers along the way. The mercenaries followed the plan to the letter, obeying the order not to leave anyone alive. In the midst of the chaos, a messenger ran up to Fabro and told him they were in trouble. Fabro, already sensing disaster, replied that he already knew, but wanted to know where the front line was. Fabro said that there was no way to win that battle, but the messenger informed him that 70% of the men had already been lost. They were all being beheaded without any mercy or hesitation. Fabius realized that if they stayed there, they would all die, so he ordered them to retreat immediately. However, in the next second, the soldier right in front of him was killed by needles thrown with precision by Belinda. She appeared saying that she knew Fabro had been there all along, and of course he recognized Belinda as soon as he saw her. Shortly afterwards, all the soldiers in the support unit were dead. The enemy camp was completely ablaze. It was the end of that base. Only Fabro remained alive, tied up in the middle of the ruins. Belinda explained that the man was Fabro, one of Perdium's vassals, who had been sent to Dugard. Not only had he sold Perdium secret information, he had also taken command of the enemy's support unit. Fabro, desperate, begged for mercy and said he would surrender. But Grizzlane just approached him and asked who had started it all. Fabro, trembling, replied that it was Desmond, the count who had threatened him and forced him to cooperate. Grizzlane thought that he had expected everything to lead back to Desmond. Even so, Fabro tried to justify himself by saying that he had dedicated his whole life to Perdium and that if Grizzlane spoke to Dugard's people, they might be able to back down. But Grizzlane ordered him to raise his head, and just as Fabro began to thank him for the chance, Grizzlane cut off his head with a single blow. He said that he didn't make deals with traitorous vermin like him and that everyone who had betrayed Perdium deserved to die. Soon after, the group set off towards their next objective. Kior asked his captain what they would do now, and Grizzlane explained that they would head towards Dugard's fort, as the main attack had probably already begun. The idea was to attack them from behind. Once they arrived, Kior and Belinda should help from the left, while he would attack from the right. Gillian would be in charge of the headquarters, even though he knew he would have to face many men alone. Gillian, with a big smile on his face, said that there was no problem, that Grizzlane's request was an order. Kior, a little jealous, commented that the old man was going to have all the fun. Belinda then asked who would look after the castle gates, and Grizzlane replied that no one would. He looked back and said that that war would change the history of Perdium forever. Meanwhile, Zwalder was organizing the soldiers to resist the direct attack. They were blocking the stones thrown by the catapults and counterattacking with arrows. But Dugard's soldiers had already started climbing the walls, and there was no choice but to fight hand to hand right there. Tamus, watching from afar, laughed enthusiastically, saying that this was exciting. He didn't even need to see the outcome to know how it would end. He had already prepared the catapults for a new wave of attacks. Victor thought that would be the end of the North Wolf. He had expected to face a little more difficulty, but even so, he recognized that Zwalder and Randolph were giving their all to hold off the enemy soldiers. Randolph commented that the walls were still holding up well, but that he didn't know if the main gate would be able to hold out for long. Zwalder ordered them not to do anything about the gate, as the priority was to keep the walls strong. He asked how many allies could still help, and Skovan replied that most of the counties were unable to provide aid. They were very sorry, but the county of Zimbar and also Leopold were unable to send troops, and they had completely lost contact with the messenger sent to Rogers. In other words, Perdium couldn't count on any reinforcements from outside. Meanwhile, on the Dugard side, a messenger ran to Tamos to tell them that they had an urgent problem. The support unit had been attacked, and the soldiers who had been sent to get supplies hadn't returned either. Tamos, surprised, asked how this was possible and how Perdium could know the exact location of the support unit. Victor then connected the dots and realized that the smoke and fire he had seen earlier must have been from the destroyed base. He was impressed, as he hadn't imagined Perdium's men to be so cunning. It was kind of funny to him. Thomas commented that they had barely started the war and were already running out of supplies, but Victor, undeterred, patted him on the cheek and said that it didn't matter. The important thing was to win the war that day. Victor then walked slowly towards the walls, carefully observing the whole situation. He noticed that the attacks on the east and west sides had not yet been completed, which indicated that Perdium's elite, including the North Wolf himself, were still resisting strongly in these areas. However, the main gate was practically unprotected. It was at that moment that Victor raised his sword and gave the order for his troops to charge the gate. The intention was to destroy it completely. He then called for Aiden Simam, his knight and faithful squire. to lead the advance. Victor decided to head towards the gate and said he would break it down himself, while Adon stayed behind, waiting to face any enemy that came up from behind. Meanwhile, the enemy soldiers continued climbing the walls. Scovan, Walter, and Randolph were managing to deal with the situation at that point, but Scovan warned that something was happening in the tower. Zwalder said that the enemies probably knew exactly how big the wall was, and Randolph commented that if they reached the tower, it would be the end for all of them. Zwalder then asked if the catapult was ready, at which point it was finished. They quickly launched an attack in the direction of the tower, and the enemies clearly hadn't expected it. However, someone easily blocked the shot, and that someone was Victor himself. Zwalter immediately realized that he was no ordinary person. Victor then stated that there was no point in trying to stop it, because his end was already predestined, and ordered his battalion to advance. They were ready to bring down the gate once and for all, and more enemy soldiers kept pouring through the walls. Zwalder thought of his son and the plan he had prepared. At that moment, the enemies banged hard against the gate, trying to break it down. While all this was going on, the wizards were trapped inside the castle along with Vanessa and Fergus, who were there as lookouts. Alfoy said that they were all wizards and that they shouldn't be involved in such a horrible war, but Fergus asked them all to keep quiet, as these were the young master's orders. Alfoy was indignant and asked how they could remain silent while the castle was being invaded and the war was drawing to a close. He said that everyone would die, but Vanessa tried to reassure him by saying that she was sure her master, Grizzlane, would find a way. Alfoy revolted, saying that she had to be joking and that he didn't even want to hear the name of that bastard, because it was his fault that everyone was about to die. He ordered her to shut up and questioned how she could still follow that lunatic's orders, but Vanessa replied that he wasn't crazy. Then the scene flashed back to a few days ago, when Vanessa was practicing her magic. She had only managed to create a small spell and apologized to her master because the result was still weak. Even so, Grizzlane said it was alright, because the important thing was that she was now able to use magic, and with time her power would increase. Later, Grizzlane showed her something. The mages were hard at work while the knights just watched. They were burying runestones in the ground, which confused Vanessa. Alfoy asked why he was making the mages dig, since he had so many subordinates at his disposal. But Gordon had no patience, and gave Alfoy a lance kill, ordering him to get back to work. Vanessa then asked what it all meant, and Grizzlane explained that now they were ready. In a war, the simplest strategy was to crush the enemy with an absurd number of troops, and no matter how hard the opponent fought, one day they would break through the gates. But it wasn't as if there wasn't a way to turn that battle around. Vanessa was the first to realize what he wanted to do, and wondered if he could really do it. Even though she was afraid, she began to concentrate all her magical power on the center of the magic circle in front of her. Alfoy, observing this, tried to understand and wondered if that circle was a mana transfer formation. Vanessa, keeping her focus, remembered Grizzlane's words, saying that she could do it and that he trusted in her potential. Meanwhile, the enemies kept pounding hard on the gate, almost breaking through the entrance to the fortress, until Randolph spotted an unexpected movement in the distance. Zwalter immediately recognized the troop as the elite unit led by his own son. Just then, a messenger approached Victor to deliver an urgent report. The supply unit had been attacked by unknown forces coming from two different directions. It was Kaor and Belinda taking care of one flank, while Grizzlane was advancing on the other. The enemy soldiers, caught by surprise, had no time to react. Even with all the efforts and attacks directed at Grizzlane, nothing seemed to work. He alone, with his great blade, eliminated dozens of enemies, turning the field into a veritable massacre. Everyone who witnessed that moment called him a monster. But Grizzlane didn't stop. He ordered Perdium's soldiers to stand up. Now was the time for a counterattack, and the battle was about to turn in their favor.